Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Naruto Attacked Queen Olga. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. On the continent of Eos, a long-standing war has been going on between two factions. On one side of the conflict is what is known as the Seven Shields Alliance, a conglomerate of warrior princesses sworn to safeguard the people of Eos. The alliance is reluctantly headed by Celestine Lucas, a rare high elf who advocates strongly for peace and detests violence but longs for the war to end. Celestine is often heralded as the reincarnation of a goddess, largely due to her ability to peer into the future. On the opposite side of the conflict is the powerful sorceress and necromancer Alga Discordia, a dark elf with a deeply seated grudge against humankind. Alga leads a vast horde of monsters and is hellbent on conquering Eos, and perhaps even the entire world. For many years, she and Celestine have been bitter rivals, and thus far, neither side has truly gained the advantage in this war. However, Celestine has recently received a new vision, one that will tip the balance of the war and decide the ultimate fate of Eos, and perhaps the world at large. At this very moment, within a certain cathedral, the high elf herself stands at the head of a large table, preparing to share her latest vision with her dear friends and comrades. She glanced about the chamber, taking in the forms of her friends and comrades who gaze at her expectantly. First is her longtime bodyguard Claudia Levantine, strong, fierce, and kind, a loving wife, and a dutiful knight. She is Celestine's sword and shield, and is thus in charge of both 6th and 7th fortresses the princess knights used to keep Olga's army of monsters at bay. Ruru, the guardian of the 5th fortress. She may be small, but she is ferocious and powerful. Ruru loves to eat and is perhaps one of the most loyal and dedicated members of the alliance, with many jokingly referring to her as Celestine's attack dog. Maya, despite being a mercenary, she is still hailed as a warrior princess and is in charge of the 4th fortress. She may be one of the more laid-back and easygoing members, but she is a fierce fighter in her own right and refuses to let harm come to those who cannot protect themselves. Her humble origins and kind nature make her very popular amongst the commoners. Kaguya, the guardian of the 3rd fortress and the head priestess of a mysterious religion. She is somewhat taciturn and aloof, but she is still a kind person and a powerful practitioner of magic. Her followers have also been invaluable in their assistance to aiding the sick and injured during these trying times. Prim, the princess of the 2nd fortress, a shy and kind-hearted girl who is extremely popular amongst the common folk due to both her beauty and compassion. Thanks to Prim's guidance and direction, many people have been working hard to supply the Alliance's soldiers with much-needed supplies while also ensuring that everyone had plentiful food to eat so that no one may go hungry. Alicia, the princess of the 1st fortress who guards the borders of the Alliance from invasion. Chivalrous and strong, Alicia is a knight through and through. She is also protective of her cousin, Prim, and the two work very strongly together to safeguard the realm from Olga's forces. Thus far, Alicia has yet to know defeat. Finally, there was one other occupant in this chamber, and the only man present. While he wasn't a member of the Alliance, his presence here was a necessity given both his vast experience and reputation. Vult, the head of the Kuroinu mercenaries, the largest and most fearsome mercenary company in Eos, known far and wide. Inwardly, Celestine was not eager to hire his services, but her many advisors reasoned that hiring him and his company would be a necessary evil, which Celestine, with great reluctance, agreed. Celisama, what's the big news? Ruru shouted impatiently, repeatedly slapping the top of the table with her hands, breaking the high elf from her musings. I'm with the little lady on this one. Don't keep us in suspense. Vult spoke as he propped his feet up on the table and leaned back in his seat with his hands clasped behind his head. Some of the other princesses seemed ready to scold the halfling and the mercenary for their rudeness, but were silenced when the elf goddess waved them off and cleared her throat. Forgive me, I was lost in thought. First of all, I wish to thank everyone for answering my summons with such swiftness. Secondly, and much more importantly, I have foreseen something important. I believe that this war may finally come to an end, she announced, earning looks of relief and excitement from the princesses, while Vult had a strange little grin on his face. What did you see? Do our armies march upon Olga's castle, smash down her doors, and take her prisoner? Give me the order and I shall personally lead the charge for Eos and its people. Alicia spoke confidently, and drew her sword, raising it high into the air for emphasis. However, instead of responding, Celestine's face seemed somewhat crestfallen. Did she bear ill news? After a few moments of silence, Kaguya finally spoke. Do we face defeat then? At her question, the blonde elf tucked a few strands of her hair behind her ear before replying at last regrettably, my latest vision was more obscure this time. Hey, you just said that you believed this war was gonna end. What did you see? Tell us, Ruru shouted, almost leaping out of her seat, the tension quickly rising in the chamber. I said that I have foreseen something important. My vision came in 2 pieces. The first piece revealed to me that Olga has a weapon. I did not see what it was, but from what I could tell, she had been cultivating this secret weapon for some years now and is almost ready to unleash it on Eos. A high elf explained, the room becoming swiftly silent, so silent that one could easily hear a pin drop on the floor. A super weapon, now that I think about it, there has been an unusual lack of activity from Olga's forces. It was almost like they are getting ready for something. They may be preparing to make their big move, Alicia muttered, now realizing that if they didn't act quickly and the Dark Elf Queen were to unleash this weapon, the alliance would be no more. And Eos would be conquered and shackled by Olga, who would rule over all with an iron fist and a boot upon the people's necks, or more likely, an executioner's axe. In the second piece of your vision, Claudia asked, noticing that her longtime friend in charge seemed to be rather drained, likely distressed by the violence that was sure to come soon. Regardless, this war needed to end once and for all. The high elf straightened herself and then spoke. I foresaw that Olga would lose her powers. She will soon be vulnerable. At this piece of news, the alliance members seemed ready to burst into cheers. Celestine's visions always came to pass, and with this information, they now had the chance to aim directly for Olga herself and cut off the head of the serpent. Alicia smirked as she brandished her sword once more, with Ruru hefting one of her battle axes, the former stating, that settles it then, we must consolidate our forces and lead an all-out assault on Olga's fortress. At this, Vult chuckled a bit, crossing his arms over his as he spoke. You do that, and you run the risk of leaving your lands vulnerable. That's why I'm here. Isn't it? He asked, quickly putting together the purpose behind his presence here, and if he was right then he could see about accomplishing his own ambitions. At his question, Celestine gravely nodded as she spoke. You may have already guessed, but the answer is yes. I consulted my advisors, and they assured me that this was the best option. We will hire your Kuroinu to lead the vanguard in this war. You will invade Olga's lands and capture her by any means necessary. So we're to be the sacrificial lambs then being sent into the meat grinder where we may succeed or fail, Vult responded with a sneer. But his expression softened as he gave a small smirk and continued, Ma, what the hell, you only get to live once, right? The Kuroinu will accept the job, but it'll cost you triple our usual rates. Triple, Alicia shouted in outrage, but was calmed when her cousin Prim spoke. Alicia, we are asking them to risk their lives, to march into the lion's den. If they succeed in capturing Olga and end this war, then I would say that they would have more than earned their pay. Celestine nodded in agreement and then stated, Primson is right. Upon your success, Vultson, you will be appropriately rewarded. At this, Vult gave a satisfied nod while trying to suppress a full smile as he mentally pictured Olga's beautiful form. When Olga's legions are conquered and she is his slave, he will enjoy breaking the rest of these haughties as he formed his own country. A place where women unconditionally served men's Yule needs regardless of if they were willing or not. With that said and done, Vult made his exit, determined to see his plans through. He was definitely looking forward to getting the last laugh. Unknown to everyone in the chamber, though, things would not play out as anyone would expect. Days later, the Kuroinu marched through the territory of Olga's legion, making a beeline for her fortress. Morale was high, and everyone here shared in Vult's vision. However, the mercenary leader sensed that something wasn't quite right. Thus far, they hadn't encountered any legion forces of any kind, and according to their maps, they were close to the fortress itself, so why had no one come to stop them? The most likely explanation was an ambush. Was the queen aware of her own imminent loss of power? If so, perhaps she had brought all of her forces to her castle to defend her while she worked to restore her abilities. If that was the case, then things would likely get messy. On and on they marched, until the Dark Elf Queen's fortress came into view at long last. As Vult suspected, he could see the legion's army had the place surrounded and were all armed for battle. Vult ordered his men to get into battle formations and to prepare themselves for a potential attack. After all, if they could see the enemy, then the enemy could see them. He expected the Legion forces to begin their march to repel them. Minutes slowly ticked by as the Kuroinu assumed their positions, and still the Legion made no movements. That's funny, what the devil are they waiting for? Vult wondered. He had planned on drawing at least some of Olga's forces, but they hadn't budged an inch. Very strange. The Legion forces were infamously known for their savagery and brutal nature. One would easily assume that they would charge at the first sign of an enemy. At last, Vult saw movement in the form of a rider, a samurai dressed from head to toe in black armor, carrying a katana on his hip and a kanabo on his back, riding a black steed. It would seem that the queen had sent an envoy, a sign of her growing weakness. The mercenary leader thought with a smug expression as he stepped forward to greet the envoy with his right-hand men, Hicks and Keen. The envoy stopped and dismounted his steed, his face obscured by a Hanya mask that seemed to be grinning wickedly at the mercenaries. Vult, Hicks, and Keen of the Kuroinu, welcome to the lands of the Queen Olga Discordia. The envoy greeted, surprising the three men at the fact that he already knew their names. It almost seemed as if they were expected. You seem to have us at a disadvantage, stranger. Vult spoke as he hefted his sword and pointed towards the samurai. However, the envoy's posture remained relaxed despite the fact that he was staring down an entire army. I know you. I know all about you. Do you honestly believe that Celestine is the only one that can perceive the future? The envoy asked, his words causing the mercenary leader to quirk up an eyebrow. Oh, so you see the future too? That explains why we haven't met any resistance yet. You were expecting us. Awfully foolish of you to come out here and greet us like this. You would have been much safer behind those castle walls unless you wished to join the winning team, Vult asked, a wide grin forming on his face. If this guy was the real deal, then he could be a useful asset to him and his goals. I refuse. I know your goal. You view women as nothing but tools to satiate your carnal desires. They aren't even people to you, just toys. People like you, I view as nothing less than vermin to be exterminated. The stranger spoke as he drew his katana and kanabo, the two weapons glowing with a sinister black aura with a crimson outline that seemed to swallow the light around them. That's so a shame. I was gonna offer you a spot in my country, but if you're satisfied with licking the queen's boots, then we have no need for you. The mercenary leader spoke, getting ready to give the signal for his men to put down this mild annoyance, but then the stranger removed his Hanya mask, revealing the fresh face of a teenager with spiky blonde hair and whisker-like markings on his face. The hella kid, Vult asked, mildly surprised that a boy so young had come out to face them. The kid couldn't have been more than 15 years of age or so. My name is Naruto Uzumaki Discordia, adopted child of Queen Olga Discordia and Forge Master of the Legion. The now identified Naruto proudly proclaimed, much to the surprise of the mercenaries. Why would the queen adopt a human kid? She hates humans, Hicks shouted in confusion. Forget that, did you hear him? He said he's a Forge Master. Is he for real? Keen shouted out, making his boss Vult grit his teeth. He had heard that title before. According to the legends, Devil Forge Masters, or simply Forge Masters for short, are humans versed in the dark arts, capable of creating monsters and demons from raw materials, most particularly from the bodies of the dead. If Alga had one at her disposal, then she's likely been using him in secret to bolster the numbers of the Legion. I foresaw your arrival, Vult. I foresaw Olga's defeat, her Legion turning on her and her aide Khloe and obeying you. That is in another timeline. My presence here drastically alters things. I have already taken measures to ensure such a thing never comes to pass. Creatures created by a Forge Master are bound to and must obey their creator, but for the Legion monsters that possess their free will, well, now they no longer have it. I turned their brains into mush. Now they're just mindless cannon fodder that can be easily disposed of and later reforged into loyal beasts by my hand. Seemed like poetic justice in a way, given what would happen if you were to win. Naruto explained with a grin. The whiskered teen then sighed as he replaced his Hanya mask and spoke, I guess that's enough exposition. Vultson, I'll be sure to add you to my vast collection of undead meat puppets. I think your Halfert corpse will be most useful for shoveling out feces from the stables and outhouses. The mercenary leader grit his teeth and shouted, that's enough out of you all, your adoptive mommy right in front of you, and then make her watch as I gut you. The Uzumaki simply chuckled and replied, before that, you ever heard of the term misdirection? While we have been going back and forth, what do you think my forces have been doing at the blonde's question? As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to shake, making the mercenaries realize their careless mistake they'd been at. Giant worm-like creatures erupted from the ground and slammed their massive bodies down, crushing large numbers of mercenaries. Those that avoided being crushed attempted to stab and hack at the large worms, only to be melted by the corrosive and acid-like from the worms. The monsters then retreated back into the holes from whence they came, only for various creatures and demons to come pouring out of the freshly dug holes as they began tearing through the surprised and rattled mercs. Before Vult could even react, he felt a blade pierce his and saw the Hanya-masked boy had stabbed him with his katana. You were awfully certain of your victory. Maybe in another time where a cruel god permitted you victory, that would have been possible. But not here, not now. Right now I'm your god, and I guarantee that your undead existence will be a miserable and cursed one. Vult fell to the ground, almost gushing from the open wound as he saw his army being brutally torn apart. He saw men being cut down by swords and spears and claws, others torn apart and eaten by hungry beasts. Within moments the Kuroinu were slain and the throat cutters were already searching for survivors to be put to the sword. Your men will make fine additions to my army. Their corpses will be useful in making more demons. The Hanya-masked teen added, before stomping on Vult's face. Just like that the Kuroinu had come to an end, it was now time for the Legion to make their move. The carnage started to quiet down as the screams of the dying and the sounds of fighting came to an end. The only sounds now was a pair of horses approaching. The semi-conscious Vult then saw the forms of the dark elf Queen Olga herself appear, followed by another elf woman with blonde hair and red eyes. The blonde elf dismounted first and assisted the queen from her steed, allowing Olga to dismount as she surveyed the now wide battlefield, or perhaps more accurately, it should be called a field of slaughter. The queen stepped forward, her eyes coldly surveying the deaths of so many disgusting humans, the worst sort in fact. Soon, their corrupt and worthless selves would be reborn as demons, bound to her Forge Master and by extension to her. The Uzumaki dropped to one knee, bowing to his queen and his mother, who looked down on him with a warm and proud smile on her face. Rise, my son. You need not bow before me. She spoke in a loving tone, placing a delicate finger beneath his chin and then gently guiding him back up to his full height. He removed his Hanya mask, prompting the queen to plant on each cheek, a gesture he returned before the dark elf turned her attention to the dying mercenary. So this is Vult, the man who was to beat me and defile me and Khloe. She muttered coldly, her lips twitching until they formed a cruel smile as she continued, your body will soon be defiled. Vult, you'll be a mindless slave for us to exploit. I believe my son was planning to make you into a mindless drone to shovel away the fecal excrements of beasts from the stables. Yes, how fitting. This wasn't Vult tried to wheeze out only to be stopped as the blonde dark elf planted a dagger into his groin. That's for me and Olga-sama, you misogynistic pig. Khloe growled out and then planted an extra dagger into his groin, stabbing through his testicles. Vult's eyes widened from the shock and pain, and at last his life came to an end. With their main enemy dead, it was now time to turn their attention to conquering the Alliance, starting with the first fortress headed by Alicia, then all of those would be theirs. Days later, First Fortress. It had been some time since Vult's forces marched off into Legion territory, however, they had yet to receive word of their victory. Alicia stood upon the ramparts, looking out towards the horizon, contemplating on sending some scouts to enter the enemy's territory to determine the Kurainu's success or failure. Before she could come to her final decision, she took notice of something approaching. An army was marching towards them. At first, she wondered if it was the Kuroinu, finally making their return. Now it was time to see if they had indeed earned their pay, however. As the army grew ever closer, she noticed that the troops were carrying the banner of the Legion. The Kuroinu had failed, now the Legion was going to strike back. All troops to arms were under attack. Get all the civilians to the shelters, spread the word to arms, Alicia shouted to her troops. And all at once, the first fortress was stirred into a frenzy like a kicked hornet's nest. Soldiers began taking their battle positions while the civilians ran to their hiding places. Some brave volunteers stayed with the troops to take up arms, ready to defend their homes from the invading forces. Blessings be upon those brave souls. Alicia drew her sword, ready to perform her duty in repelling the enemy, all the while swearing that she would do whatever it took to defeat the Legion. Unfortunately, she also took notice that the Legion's numbers appeared to have swelled dramatically, their numbers being far greater than in previous skirmishes. It would seem that Olga had found a method to increase the numbers of her troops. In fact, there were many more varieties of monsters now, all of which she had never seen before. This was going to get why. Nevertheless, as a proud knight, she would defend this fortress unto her dying breath. Off in the distance, she could see the enemy getting into formation. Strange, they were acting unusually organized. Usually the monsters of the Legion attacked with reckless abandon, like wild and rabid animals. Their only instincts were to destroy and to violate. Now they were behaving like a well-trained army. What had changed? Something wasn't right. She then saw a little black speck approaching from the main army. As the figure drew closer, she saw that it was a lone rider, carrying a white flag, a samurai of the east dressed in black wearing a Hanya mask. Did the Dark Queen have a new general leading the charge? Was this him? Regardless, it was obvious this rider was here to demand their surrender. The masked man came to a halt, just a few short yards from the gates. As he looked up at the ramparts, even from behind his mask, she could sense that he was looking directly at her. Princess Alicia Arcturus, he questioned as he planted his flag into the ground. In response to his inquiry, she stiffly nodded and replied, "'Tis I. Who are you?" "I am Naruto Uzumaki Discordia, adopted son of Queen Olga Discordia, General of the Legion and Devil Forgemaster. Your mercenary army, the Kuroinu, have failed you. Worse yet, they were planning to betray you." Vult and his men were planning on creating their own empire, one where men held dominion and women became little more than slaves. The masked man spoke in an even tone, his words causing a ripple of confusion and fear from Alicia's troops. The princess looked around and saw that the morale of her soldiers had been severely crippled. Between this grave news, this massive army but a stone's throw away, and perhaps worst of all, the presence of a Forgemaster, their situation was dire indeed. Alicia did not know Vult well, aside from his reputation as a skilled and ruthless warrior. However, she sensed no deception from the masked man, nor could she find any reason for him to lie about this treachery. Still, a Forgemaster. She had heard the legends. With one of those at the Dark Queen's command, she could easily create as many monsters as she wanted or needed. Now it made sense why the Legion army were behaving much more organized and disciplined. Monsters created by the Forgemaster were bound to their will, and with this new general leading them, the Legion was more dangerous than ever. "I didn't realize that the Queen had a son, much less had adopted a son," Alicia replied, biting her lip. Now that she knew what they were up against, she came to the swift conclusion that they couldn't win on their own. She needed to send a messenger hawk with all haste to call for help, and they needed to hold out till reinforcements arrived. For now, she needed to stall for time. "I was the Queen's best-kept secret and her trump card in this war. I'm sure your goddess Celestine had a vision about my mother possessing a weapon, maybe also had a vision of my mother losing her powers under mysterious circumstances." The masked samurai spoke in a sly tone, his words making the blonde princess stiffen. Just how in the hell did he know about that? Before she could ask, she was interrupted by a voice she immediately recognized that whispered into her ear, "Princess, the enemy leader is right there. Order the archers to shoot him now. If the Forgemaster dies, then all of his creations will die with him. We can win the war right now." Alicia turned her head, meeting the gaze of her Prime Minister, Beardsley, her advisor and confidante. While she mostly handled military matters within the fortress and kept the peace, he handled the day-to-day duties that kept things going. His help was invaluable in maintaining the first fortress. She swallowed dryly at his advice, feeling a sliver of temptation to give the order, but her code of honor as a knight and sense of chivalry forbade her from doing such a thing. This Naruto came alone, under a banner of truce. She could not in good conscience murder him in such a manner. No, if she ordered her archers to kill him, she would be no better than the monsters she had fought so long and hard against. Shaking her head, she called down to the Hanya, "Speak your terms, General." "I am listening." Naruto drew his katana and raised it towards the sky. Even from this distance the princess and her troops could sense raw power emanating from the black blade as the samurai called out, "One land, one ruler, that is my peace. Princess Alicia, I have no desire to murder your civilians or lay waste to their homes. I propose that we settle this with a duel of honor. Me versus you. The loser shall offer complete surrender to the victor." "The rules of engagement?" Alicia asked, resting a hand on her sword. It would seem that this stranger possessed a code of honor as well. If she could defeat him in single combat, then not only would countless lives be spared, but with him in irons, she could force him to make his army retreat, and victory would go to the alliance. Yes, this was perfect. "Anything goes excluding outside interference. We shall duel here at your gates. On the morrow when the sun rises, full quarter is to be given." When asked, "Do you accept?" the masked samurai asked, his words making the princess smile brightly. "I accept your challenge," she shouted back, eager to duel a worthy opponent and potentially bring an end to the war. The samurai in black nodded in understanding and then retreated back towards his army, leaving the princess to prepare for their duel. The blonde knight immediately made plans to prepare her best armor and favorite sword for the duel, eat a filling meal and get a good night's rest. However, she was stopped when the voice of Beardsley angrily hissed, "Are you insane? Agreeing to this duel? You could have finished things right there. One order to the archers and he'd be finished." Perhaps, but that would have been both dishonorable and cowardly. That aside, he had shown no aggression. It would be unjust to attack someone without provocation. She responded bitterly, feeling angered and insulted that her advisor tried to get her to perform such a disgraceful act. "That damned chivalry of yours will be the end of us all," Beardsley muttered as he stomped off, but then briefly stopped and glanced towards the Legion army. An idea brewing in his mind, he then smirked and continued on, having an idea how he could make the best of a bad situation. Alicia paid him no mind as she ordered her troops to stand guard and be prepared, just in case. For now, she had a duel to prepare for. A few hours later, Legion encampment. Within a large tent, the forms of the dark elf Queen Olga, her loyal aide Khloe, and of course her adopted son Naruto could be seen sitting around a table, enjoying a luxurious meal. "Don't know how you do it, Khloe, but I can never get enough of your food," Naruto praised with a broad grin as he picked up a large drumstick and bit off a large chunk of meat off of it. Half-elf beamed from the compliment as she replied, "We all have our skills. Naturally, I chose to learn how to cook for Olga-sama and you, of course." At that, the Dark Queen let out a soft giggle as she swirled a glass of wine for a few moments. Due to her past enslavement by humans, it was only natural that Khloe hated humankind with a passion. However, Naruto was a special exception. Olga then cleared her throat as she raised a hand with small sparks appearing from her fingers. As predicted by the vision that Naruto had seen, her powers were indeed on the decline. Had Vult and his Kuroinu invaded, she would have been practically helpless. Still, why were her powers vanishing? What was the cause? Magic was a complex subject. However, she was certain that she could find a means to reverse this, especially with Naruto's help given his brilliance and skill. If all else failed, she could use Naruto's mana to restore her own. At any rate, with the Kuroinu defeated and their dead now bolstering the now mindless and subservient Legion army, they could now march upon the alliance. The various monsters she held command over were fickle by nature and only served the strong and prone to follow their base instincts, chiefly to murder and destroy. There was no room for doubt that once Vult had conquered her, they would have readily joined him and both her and Khloe and any other female they got their hands on. She felt no sympathy whatsoever for those vile creatures once Naruto successfully destroyed their minds, if it could be called that. "It is quite brilliant of you, Naruto-sama, using the princess code of chivalry against her. Little does she know that she is stepping into the ring with an invincible warrior." Khloe spoke with a broad grin, very eager to see the humans put in their place and humiliated for their past sins against all elvenkind. Indeed, more importantly, once she is defeated and in chains, most of, if not all the other humans will fall into line. After all, there is no point in ruling an empire with no subjects to rule over, Olga added as she took a sip of her wine. "Just leave it to me. I won't lose." Naruto spoke with confidence, earning nods from the two dark elves. They settled into a comfortable silence as they continued with their meal, only for one of Naruto's demonic soldiers to enter their tent. "I thought I said that we weren't to be disturbed unless something important came up," the blonde teen asked at the end, earning a nod from the demon that began speaking in a guttural tone, the words escaping his mouth being unknown to the two elves. They nicknamed the strange language as Black Speech, a language spoken from the foulest and darkest of creatures, most prominently those summoned from hell. However, thanks to his status as a devil forge master and the bond he shared with his creations, Naruto understood Black Speech with perfect clarity. "It seems we have a visitor. Show him in," the Uzumaki ordered at the end before replacing his signature Hanya mask. The demon nodded as it stepped outside, and an old man was shoved inside the tent, one that Naruto quickly recognized. "I remember you. You were on the ramparts with Alicia," the Forge Master commented as he leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms over his. Both Olga and Khloe glared in suspicion towards the old man, with the latter gripping a hidden dagger in case their visitor tried anything. Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am Prime Minister Beardsley of the First Fortress. It is an honor to meet you all in person. Especially you, almighty and beautiful Queen Olga. Beardsley spoke as he gave a dramatic bow. The queen seemed ready to lurch forward and vomit from the praise, disgusted by the fall looks she was getting from the man's beady eyes. She then turned towards her son and aggressively gestured towards him, almost as if she were saying, "Get this over with." Getting the message, her son nodded and then spoke, "State your piece, Beards. Listen. My queen is getting impatient, and you do not want to waste her time or test her patience." At that, the Prime Minister straightened up and cleared his throat while muttering a quick "Forgive me." The aged man then spoke, "I shall get straight to the point then. I know a losing battle when I see one. I'm betting that even if Alicia bests you in combat, you'll give the order for your troops to invade, in which case, the First Fortress is indeed doomed given the size and strength of your obviously mighty army. My proposal is this: I can show you and your troops to a secret passage into the fortress, the very one I used to sneak out. You can take the fortress with ease and perhaps a minimum amount of shed." Alga and Khloe glanced at one another and then to Naruto, the three of them finding it awfully convenient that this man was offering the fortress on a silver platter, though that was not unexpected of a human. Greed and deceit were practically the bread and butter of bureaucrats like this Prime Minister. He definitely could not be trusted. In exchange, the Hanya asked as he used a kunai to clean out some dirt and grime from beneath his fingernails, his eyes glaring dangerously at the old man from behind his mask. "That you leave me in charge of the First Fortress in your stead. Furthermore, I request Alicia." The aged man spoke, fully licking his lips as the mental image of the blonde knight filled his mind. Deciding to play along for a bit, Naruto spoke, "So as my troops the women and murder the men, you want Alicia all to yourself as your personal slave. Maybe you want to get her young preggers with your old man seed." Beardsley eagerly nodded in confirmation, and then suddenly the temperature inside the tent seemed to drop exponentially, and a sense of danger overcame the Prime Minister as he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Warning bells ringing loudly in his mind. "See, we don't do that sort of thing anymore. I personally rendered all of the Legion monsters into mindless meat puppets. The rest are my loyal demons, forged by my hands. I do not allow them to others anymore, nor was it my queen's desire for the monsters to others before my intervention. I digress though. We do not want, much less need your help, Beardsley, though I think your little princess will want to know how you tried to sell her out." The Hanya then snapped his fingers, and a pair of demons entered the tent, carrying chains and shackles to bind the old man. It was then that Beardsley realized he had made a grave error. "One more thing, I have no tolerance for rapists or for traitors," Naruto added, and then within moments, the Prime Minister was taken prisoner. The princess was going to be in for a shock. The next morning, Alicia stood in front of the gates of her fortress, clad in her finest armor and armed with her sharpest blade. She glanced up at the ramparts, noting how tense her soldiers were with many civilians watching and waiting to see the coming duel unfold. She couldn't really blame them. The next few minutes were going to be a major tipping point in this war. She heard the sounds of a horse approaching, too, in fact. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the forms of Naruto and an unknown woman with blonde hair, dark skin, and elf ears. "Good morning, Princess Alicia." The Hanya cordially greeted before gesturing to his companion. "This is Khloe, my mother's aide." "Princess," Khloe gruffly greeted, earning a slow nod from the blonde knight, who then noticed that the half-elf's horse was carrying a large barrel for some reason. Just what were they up to? Surely they weren't going to pull a fast one on her, were they? If they did anything to violate this duel, she would make them pay dearly. The samurai dismounted his horse, handing the reins to Khloe, who accepted them, then planted 2 fingers on her lips before placing them on the mouth region of his mask. A sort of good luck, no doubt. Naruto then drew his katana and kanabo, squaring off against the princess, who drew her sword. "What is in that barrel?" Alicia asked out of curiosity. In response to her question, the Uzumaki chuckled darkly, which unnerved the blonde knight a little bit. "We'll get to that later," he answered cryptically, and then charged at full speed towards the knight, swinging his spoke club. Alicia quickly pivoted out of the way as the kanabo came crashing to the ground, leaving behind a series of spiderweb cracks on the ground. She thrust her blade forward, aiming to pierce his ribs, only for him to deflect her sword with his own. He then lunged forward with all his momentum, smashing his forehead into the bridge of her nose, causing a sickening crunchy noise to sound out, making Alicia stumble back. Poured out of her nose as she quickly popped it back into place, now realizing that her opponent was much faster than she anticipated. "Not bad," she muttered, wiping them from her nostrils. "Word of advice, don't underestimate me for any reason." Naruto spoke, grinning beneath his mask. Knowing the princesses had been fighting violent beasts that held no real sense of tactics or skill, it had probably been some time since she had faced a truly worthy opponent. Nevertheless, it was easy to see that she wasn't deterred in the slightest. Like him, she craved a proper challenge to overcome. Not giving him a chance to attack again, Alicia quickly rushed him, delivering a flurry of lightning-fast strikes, her blade ablur as she sought to overwhelm him with the blinding speed of her attacks. Sparks flew about as the Hanya used his weapons in tandem to deflect her blows. Alicia searched for any signs of an opening in his guard, which was easier said than done as he seemed to be easily swatting her attacks aside. There was a brief break in her rhythm as she attempted to break away from him, giving him the chance to swing his kanabo towards her midsection, which she narrowly avoided by a very slight margin as she leapt away from him. He then leapt towards her, sending his knee into her stomach as she regained her balance, which collided into her stomach and sent her flying further back. She fell to the ground but rolled backwards and landed on her feet, quickly regaining her footing as she coughed up some. If things kept going like this, she wasn't going to make it. She needed to finish this swiftly before he picked her apart. Alicia's usual fighting style relied on her swift speed to take down opponents as quickly as possible. However, if a fight went on for too long, her stamina would be drained and thus her attacks would lose their effectiveness. She took a deep breath as she muttered Archerous technique, final even. Her blade was coated in a golden light as she poured her magical essence into it. This was her most powerful technique. An all-or-nothing strike that could fell any foe if it landed, her final resort and gamble. "Furious for its people," she shouted as she swung her blade, a golden energy slicing through the air, destroying everything in its wake as it sped towards the samurai. A black energy with a crimson outline formed around Naruto's katana as he shouted divine departure. He then swung his blade in a powerful arc, casting an unknown black and crimson energy towards Alicia's own attack. The black and golden energies collided in midair, creating a powerful shockwave. Unfortunately, Alicia's attack shattered into golden sparks as the black wave cut through the air and crashed against her. There was a small explosion as Alicia screamed in pain, her sword and her armor breaking apart from the force of the blow, leaving her lying on the ground in a small, smoking crater. The onlookers gasped in horror as they quickly realized the reality of their situation. Their beloved Princess Knight and their protector had been defeated. Alicia forced herself from the ground, barely managing to stand as she clutched her sword arm, which she was certain might be broken. She sighed in acceptance as she reluctantly spoke the words, "I yield." Naruto smirked beneath his mask as he sheathed his weapons and then removed his signature Hanya mask, revealing his face to the princess. "I accept your surrender," he stated with a satisfied smile. The blonde knight gaped in shock upon realizing that he was a human, a teenager at that, as she muttered, I don't understand. You're human. Why would a human support Queen Olga? Why would Olga adopt a human as her child? Are you that surprised? Humans have been waging war on each other since the beginning of time. Though my reasons, well, I guess it doesn't matter what my reasons are. The rest I shall save for later." Naruto spoke as he magically summoned a pair of shackles and clapped them on the knight's wrists. She grimaced as she didn't have the strength to resist now. Her fate was sealed. She was his prisoner now. Her fate, and the fate of her people, was now in his hands. "I think there's something you should know about." The whiskered teen spoke as he turned towards the half-elf and nodded to her. Khloe nodded in turn as she dismounted her horse and cut the barrel down, making it fall to the ground with a loud thud and a strange muffled noise to come from within. She then used a knife to pry the lid open, revealing the form of a bound and gagged Beardsley inside. "Why, Beardsley, what's going on?" Alicia asked in shock. With all the hustle and bustle of her duel going on, no one had noticed that the Prime Minister had gone missing. Then again, she had noticed his lack of presence on the ramparts this morning. But she had initially believed that he was busy with something or other, not that it initially mattered to her since she had to focus on her duel, which was moot now due to her loss. "Surprised your Prime Minister came to us last night, used a secret passage to sneak out. He offered to show it to us. In exchange, he wanted to remain as the first fortress ruler, and he wanted to claim you as his personal slave and dumpster. Apparently the old fart has a thing for young blonde girls like you. Isn't that right, you old creep?" Naruto asked the aged man mockingly. Beardsley attempted to make some muffled protests, but was silenced when Khloe stomped on his nose with the heel of her boot, crushing it and causing to spray out from his nostrils as he cried out in pain. "No, this can't Beardsley, you were going to," Alicia muttered in disbelief, her mind struggling to keep up with and process this information. "Yep, he was gonna sell you out for his own and personal fantasies. Don't believe me? How do you think we got a hold of him? What reason would I have to lie to someone that's already beaten? Kinda makes you wonder who can you trust if you can't trust one of your closest allies." "Hey," Naruto asked as he patted the princess on the shoulder. He glanced up towards the ramparts and noticed that whatever resistance that the onlookers had on them was now gone. They were now utterly crippled by this news. Their longtime Prime Minister was a traitor and wanted the princess as his pet. The man who had long watched after them and ruled them. Smiling to himself, the Uzumaki replaced his Hanya mask and gestured towards Khloe. She nodded and pulled out a large horn which she blew into, causing the Legion army to begin marching on the fortress to claim and occupy it. Without needing to be ordered, the guards of the fortress opened the gates, a broken expression on their faces knowing that the situation was hopeless. "We'll get your wounds treated, Alicia," the Uzumaki promised as the princess turned towards him with a scowl. "HMPH, I may have been defeated, but my sisters in arms will avenge me. I sent a messenger hawk out last night. Soon, the forces of the Alliance will be mustered and will come to meet your army." She spoke, trying to sound confident that the Alliance hadn't yet lost the war. After all, if the Forge Master dies, his monsters will die with him. The Forge Master was silent for a few moments, but then he responded, "That depends. Ask yourself, if your Prime Minister Beardsley was going to sell you out for his own twisted reasons, who else will do the same? Which of your allies will sell out next?" At that, Alicia's confidence was shaken as she now realized the truth and reality of the situation. He was right. Who would be the next person to sell out the princesses for their greed? Or perhaps it wouldn't be the armies of the Legion that would defeat the Alliance, but traitors from within. Alicia then looked towards the sky as she muttered, "Cousin Prim, everyone. Be safe, please be safe. Now the Legion had claimed 2 victories, the first being against the treacherous Kuroinu, and now the first fortress had fallen and its protector Princess Alicia Archeress had been claimed by the Hanya. The balance of power was now in favor of the Legion. Unless the tide is turned, Yos will assuredly fall beneath the influence of the Dark Queen. Within the 7th fortress, also known as the White Citadel, Celestine stood at a podium surrounded by numerous bishops of the church with her loyal bodyguard Claudia at her side. A high elf had a sorrowful look as the shouts of many people echoed throughout the cathedral. Soldiers, civilians, nobles, even the other princesses were clamoring over one another, desperate for their voices to be heard. Recently, a messenger hawk was received at the 2nd fortress headed by Princess Prim. The contents of the letter she received bore grim news. The Legion had invaded. Worse yet, scouts had confirmed that the 1st fortress had been taken. It was too dangerous for the scouts to proceed any further, so it was currently unknown what exactly happened to Alicia or the residents of her fortress. Between the news that Alicia had passed along in her letter, ranging from Vult having failed, and even worse that he was planning to betray the alliance, the fact that Queen Olga had a forge master at her command and the Legion army was more powerful than ever, people were scared. Everyone please remain calm. Fear and panic will make the enemy stronger, Celestine pleaded, trying to calm the frightened people. Some of the battle-hardened soldiers settled down and even some civilians regained a little composure, but the nobles were still shouting in fear and anger. Calm, the 1st fortress has fallen, the Legion has taken our very doorstep and will keep clawing away at us. Our people are undoubtedly being eaten. The Princess Alicia is a prisoner, and beyond all doubt being used by the enemy general for his own pleasure, a rather fat nobleman shouted, his words earning a horrified look from Prim, who seemed to be on the verge of crying. We may have suffered a defeat, but we haven't yet lost the war, Claudia shouted out in a booming voice, her words finally silencing the room as she continued. We now know the true nature of Olga's weapon. If we defeat her general, then the war is ours. We shall convene and form a plan to counter this invasion. Celestine nodded in gratitude and then spoke with more confidence. Indeed, we must not give in to fear. Everyone, please return to your homes and pray. Put your faith in your protectors. I assure you, we will not stop fighting for you until this threat is ended. The various soldiers, civilians, and nobles looked at each other uneasily, but they quietly departed, leaving the elf goddess and the princesses alone to convene and discuss a plan. Alicia Prim muttered with tears forming around her eyes, trying not to imagine all of the horrible things that may be happening to her. Fear not, dear Prim. My God tells me that she will be all right and that she is in no danger. Kaguya spoke, her words seemingly calming the Pinkette, who was now wiping away the moisture from her eyes with a handkerchief. You really think so? She asked for confirmation, receiving a firm nod from the priestess. Of course, my God tells no lies. The black-haired woman spoke bluntly. There were no false assurances to be found in her tone. She truly and genuinely believed it. The other princesses always found Kaguya's faith in her strange and obscure god to be quite odd. Nevertheless, her beliefs in religion were her own business, and her words helped calm Prim, so that was a positive. Giarararar. Those Legion bastards, I will fight them all. I will find the enemy leader, I will bite him, and he will hate it. I'll send out the entire halfling army to rescue Princess Alicia, Ruru loudly proclaimed as she brandished her large battle axe. Do not be so quick to charge into battle. Forge masters are very powerful. Worse, they can create more and more demonic soldiers from the bodies of the dead or raw material. Any careless attacks will only feed his army and make it stronger. Celestine spoke, her warning making the little dog-girl pout and stomp her little foot. But we gotta save Alicia, she's our friend, we don't leave friends behind, the halfling shouted, emphasizing each sentence with another stomp of her foot. Maya sighed as she scratched the back of her head and spoke, man, talk about a pain in the ass. Bad enough that the big boss Alga has a goddamn forge master, there's no telling what sort of creepy crawlies he's made for her or how many he's made. I fear that even consolidating our forces into a single fighting force may not be enough, Claudia muttered while running a hand through her hair. That is true, however, if we get the enemy to fight on our terms, we may be able to snatch the final victory, spoke an aged voice that was familiar to the princesses, most especially Claudia, as they all turned towards a pair of men. Klaus' father, she greeted the newcomers warmly. One was dressed as a scholar and the other was an aging and grizzled man dressed in armor. The former is Klaus Levant Levantine, Claudia's husband. The latter was Graves Levantine, a highly renowned warrior and a former bodyguard to Celestine. While Graves was retired from the front lines, his experience and input was still invaluable. We're in a bit of a spot, aren't we? Klaus muttered as he adjusted his glasses, his father nodding in agreement with a stern expression. Olga pulled a fast one on us and gave us all a why nose with this stunt. However, me and Klaus have come up with a plan. Consolidating our forces won't be enough. The plan is that we'll have all armed forces converge here at the White Citadel, dig in and shore up the defenses so that we can prepare and be ready for the enemy. In this battle, we do our damned hardest to cut down the enemy general and finally win this war. Graves spoke as he crossed his arms over his, a small smirk on his face. The civilians will evacuate the fortresses and hide in a designated location until the battle is finished, Klaus added as he adjusted his glasses once again. While the father and son duo seemed confident in their plan, the princesses didn't seem so certain. That's your big plan. Hunker down in the citadel and wait for the enemy to besiege us. May as well hang a big sign out at the gates that says all you can eat buffet here. Sorry, but Heltothing no, I'm not down for becoming a sitting duck. Maya spoke out with a sneer. We could try spreading out their forces, thin their numbers. That would give us a better chance at directly targeting the leader. Claudia muttered thoughtfully. While she didn't wish to go against the suggestion of her husband and her father-in-law, she too didn't like the idea of having all of their armed forces in one place. If they were placed under a siege, then it would be possible for the Legion to whittle and wear them down over time, which would be a losing battle. Graves frowned deeply as he spoke. The White Citadel is the most defensible position. We can lay out traps and armaments to help dwindle the enemy numbers. We would have the home field advantage. A tense silence fell over the room. Both plans had advantages and disadvantages. However, both plans had tremendous risks if they failed. Kaguya closed her eyes and then began to speak. There were once two brothers who owned a farm. One brother tended the crops, fields, and animals. The other brought the goods to market and sold them for profit. Eventually, the two brothers began to disagree and argue over who should receive the greater share of the profits. The farmer argued that he should get the greater share, for it was by his own hands and efforts that his brother had goods to sell. The merchant argued that he should get the greater share, for it was his silver tongue and negotiating skills that earned them so much coin. On and on they argued, day and night. By the time they finally stopped to catch their breath, the fields were barren and the animals had fled the incessant noise of their arguing, and then the brothers had nothing. Everyone blinked at the priestess and exchanged looks as an awkward silence filled the area. The silence was broken when Ruru asked what the hell was that all about? Ruru is confused. At the halfling's question, Prim piped in I think what Kagayasan is trying to say is that if we don't decide soon, then we'll lose the war. Why didn't she say so then? Ruru shouted in frustration, her brain hurting from too much thinking and talking. Her was boiling and she felt a powerful urge to fight someone or something. In her mind, all this talk wasn't going to save their friend Alicia. A decision must be made. Celestine-sama, you will have to make an executive decision, and soon before it is too late. Claudia pointed out, earning a reluctant nod from the high elf. The goddess knew this wasn't a decision to be made lightly. Her choice would affect countless lives and determine the course of the war. Their success or failure could hinge on this one choice. Indeed, everyone, return to your fortresses and await my decision. Make whatever preparations you need in the meantime. I will make my decision known soon. Celestine spoke, earning nods from the other princesses. They would need to marshal their forces and prepare the civilians for potential evacuation anyway. The high elf then retreated to her private sanctum with her loyal bodyguard in tow. The father and son duo also departed, with the former having a thoughtful expression on his face. The other princesses departed to return to their respective fortresses. However, Kaguya eyed the gentle princess, Prim, and then gently took her by the shoulder as she whispered, "Come with me." The Pinkette made no resistance as they ducked into an alcove as Prim asked, "Yes, Kagayasan, is there something you need from me?" Instead of answering directly, the priestess reached inside her sleeve and pulled out a small pearl. She then delicately placed it in the palm of the pink-haired girl's hand, confusing the princess. "My God has foretold me that you will go to your cousin's fortress. You will attempt to negotiate for Alicia's release and will offer great wealth and riches for her freedom. However, your attempts at negotiation will fail, for the enemy general cares not for material wealth." The priestess spoke, her words making the pink-haired priestess stiffen up. She feared deeply for Alicia's life and was indeed planning to try and free her. She didn't care about money, she just wanted her cousin back and was willing to part with any amount of coin to have her safely returned. "My God told me to carry this poison with me and give it to an ally in need. I see now that it is you that needs this poison. My God tells me that it is the key to your liberation." The black-haired priestess muttered, her eyes glancing down to the little pearl that Prim now held. The princess closed her fist around the pair and pocketed it, as she realized that if all else failed it may be up to her to kill the enemy. She didn't like the idea of taking a life, but if it meant the safety and happiness of her cousin, her friends, and the people of Oz, it was a necessary evil. "The poison you carry is known as the Strangler. Crush the pearl and pour the powder into a drink. It will instantly dissolve on contact with the liquid. The effects will be almost immediate upon consumption. The enemy's throat will tighten, and he will suffocate to death. A truly deadly and sadistic form of poison," the priestess explained, making Prim pale a bit. That sounded like a horrible way to die. Kaguya would the Pinkette tried to speak, but was silenced when the priestess placed 2 fingers to her lips. The black-haired girl slowly blinked her eyes as she spoke in an eerie tone, "Do not question. I am only following the will of my God." With that said, the priestess departed without another word. Prim was confused by this, but decided not to question any further. She doubted she would get a straight answer from her friend anyway. No matter what, she would rescue Alicia. Days later, First Fortress. Alicia sat quietly in a local hospital as her wounds from her duel mended. She glanced off to the side as a pair of powerful-looking demons stood at the doorway, ever vigilant and ensuring that she didn't try to escape. The only people that were allowed to see her were the doctors and nurses that came to inspect her wounds and provide meals for her. However, they were given strict orders not to speak more than necessary, leaving the blonde princess in the dark about the state of her people. Though on a positive note, she didn't hear any curdling screams of terror and anguish during her stay at the hospital. Though if she were honest, if she had to spend another day in here, she was the one that was going to scream. She hated sitting still, and it was killing her not knowing the state of things in the fortress. She couldn't even see out the window since it faced towards a neighboring building which didn't reveal anything about how her people were faring. "You look bored," spoke a familiar voice, making her jump slightly and see that the form of Naruto was sitting right next to her. Gone was his black samurai armor and Hanya mask. Instead, he seemed to be wearing a crimson custom-tailored suit that seemed soft and comfortable to wear. Just how and when did he arrive? She didn't even sense his presence. Ugh, rotting in this hospital must have dulled her senses. That obvious? She asked in a somewhat bitter tone, her pride still bruised from her loss, and wondering why he was here. To gloat, maybe to rub his victory in her face. Pretty obvious. "How's the arm?" he asked casually as he pointed to her sword arm. For a moment, Alicia quirked up an eyebrow, finding it a little strange that he was asking about her well-being. Nevertheless, she indulged him and answered much better. "It wasn't actually broken as I originally believed. Still a little sore though." He nodded with a little smile and produced a paper bag and dropped it into her lap. She peered inside and found a change of clothes, her usual outfit as a matter of fact. "In that case, time for a jailbreak. Get dressed. I think you need some real food in you." He spoke in a friendly manner before leaving the area. As he passed the two demons, he snapped his fingers, making them leave with him, giving the Princess Knight some much-needed privacy as she changed out of her hospital clothes. Once she was finished changing, she stepped outside into the hallway where her fellow blonde was waiting, a strange look on his face that seemed to reflect both nostalgia and some measure of discomfort. Without even looking at her, he spoke. "I never liked hospitals. Not since the last time I was admitted to one." "When was the last time you were admitted to a hospital?" Alicia asked. At her question, the whiskered teen turned towards her as he replied, "Not a long enough time ago." She blinked her eyes at him in confusion. What an odd response. Was that meant to be deliberately evasive? Sounded like a personal subject. Clearing her throat, she then asked, "What have you done with my subjects?" "Oh, then my demons have already killed them, eaten their hearts and drank the fluids from their spleens." The whiskered teen replied, his words making the princess gape in horror. He then laughed in her face and added, "Just kidding. Your people are all fine. Scared stiff of my demons, but all alive and well." Alicia breathed a sigh of relief at this. Celestine preserve her, the way he said it with such a straight face. She was fooled into thinking that her subjects had all been eaten. That wasn't funny. She grumbled angrily, which seemed to amuse the forge master. "No, it wasn't. The look on your face was funny," he quipped in a snarky tone, making Alicia bristle a bit as she glared at him. He was obviously teasing and tormenting her for his own twisted amusement. "Like jokes to you? Well, you've had your fun now," she grumbled, but was then surprised when she saw him reach inside of his pocket and pull out a strip of leather. It appeared to be some kind of collar. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, her face flushing in anger, embarrassment, and outrage as she growled out, "You intend to collar and leash me like an animal and parade me in front of my own people? Like I'm your pet? I'd sooner be eaten by one of your monsters." The whiskered teen stared at her, his eyes unblinking as he glanced between her and the collar, which confused the Princess Knight. He then seemed to regain his composure as he replied, "Oh, this I could put it around your neck if you're into that sort of thing. Would be kinda kinky. However, I intended to put it on your wrist or your ankle. There's a tracking seal in this, so I'll know where you are at all times. Can't have you wandering off where you're not supposed to be." She blushed deeply, now realizing that she had put her own foot in her mouth and had jumped the gun. "Big time." She cleared her throat and regained her composure as she asked, "And if I refuse to wear it? What makes you think you have a choice on that front?" He fired back, which quickly reminded the princess that the lives of her people were hanging in the balance. Without another word, she offered her hand, allowing the Uzumaki to place the tracker on her wrist. As soon as it made contact with her skin, it seemed to briefly come to life as it coiled tightly around her wrist and snapped itself into place with a click. She tugged and pulled on it experimentally to see if it would budge, but it refused to move. Now he would be able to keep tabs on her at all times. Still, this suggested that he didn't intend to confine her to one place. Keyword suggested, not confirmed. "Shall we get going then? I'm sure you must be tired of hospital food. I think something more hearty will speed up your recovery." Naruto spoke and gestured for her to follow him. She silently obeyed as she stayed close behind him and followed him out of the hospital. Once they stepped outside, Alicia was briefly blinded when the sunlight hit her eyes. Her vision quickly readjusted as she took in the sight of her former fortress, she should say. She saw numerous demons standing guard or patrolling around. As the Uzumaki stated, the people were visibly scared of the demonic soldiers. Some civilians seemed to be trying to pretend that the monsters weren't present. Others were trying to hurry about their business and shutting themselves within their homes. Others seemed to be simply waiting for whatever came next. "We helped ourselves to your armory and stripped your troops of their weapons and gear. Thanks for your generous donation, Princess." The Hanya stated with a beaming smile, making Alicia scoff. "Donation? Don't make me laugh. You stole them," she muttered bitterly, making the whiskered teen wave dismissively as he quipped, "To the victor goes the spoils." As they continued on towards the main keep, the princess took notice of strange looks from some of her subjects. They seemed to be staring at her with anger and resentment, almost as if they were blaming her for their current predicament. While she could understand their anger and disappointment since she had failed them, she had truly fought her hardest. That aside, help was soon to come. They just needed to hold on for a little while. She also took notice that numerous men were leering at her openly, their eyes ogling her body. While she was no stranger to such looks, for some reason they were far more numerous and open than usual. It almost felt like she was now a piece of meat being eyed by a pack of hungry dogs. She chose to ignore this and continued on following behind her captor as they entered the keep. Not much had changed. The various servants went about their daily chores, but there was a sense of dread in the air, largely because the servants couldn't stop fearfully glancing at the demon soldiers posted almost everywhere. The poor people. They were undoubtedly terrified that they would either be eaten or butchered, which reminded her. "Naruto, can I ask you a question?" Alicia asked, making the whiskered teen turn around with a broad smile, his hands clasped behind his back as he gave a slow nod. From the look in his eyes, it appeared as if he had already guessed what she was going to ask. "You had the opportunity to forego the duel and have Beardsley lead you to the secret passage. Why did you turn him down?" she asked, which made her fellow blonde chuckle a bit, almost as if there was some hidden joke involved. "Well, simply put, I had already agreed to the duel. Copping out would have been cheating. I am a man of my word after all, and I had no intention of making any promises to that old creep regardless of our promised duel. I cannot stand liars, cheats, and rapists," he answered, as if it were the most simple thing in the world. "You also haven't slaughtered the populace. Why, you could add them to your horde," she pointed out, earning a roll of the eyes from the whiskered teen. "Didn't I say it before? I have no desire to slaughter people who can't fight back or murder innocents. That aside, there's not much point in ruling over a dead empire, as my mother previously stated," he answered, slowly shaking his head with an amused grin. "Why did Olga adopt you? Why did she adopt a human? She is supposed to hate humans." Alicia spoke, trying to pry more information from the Forge Master. Instead of answering, he just gave a little wink and continued on, making the Princess Knight puff out her cheeks and huff in annoyance. "By the by, your Beardsley is in the dungeons. I figured you'd want to deal with him yourself for his attempted betrayal," Naruto stated, and for a brief moment, an almost sadistic smile flashed across the princess' face. "Later, I think he needs to stew down there for a while longer before I cast judgment," she said as a mental image of a wide axe entering her mind. They passed through a set of doors and into a dining room, with only one small table and a pair of chairs awaiting them. Naruto approached one of the chairs and pulled it out for her, allowing the princess to smoothly slide into it, feeling a little touched by the gentlemanly gesture. It almost made her feel like a regular woman instead of a princess or a knight. However, she couldn't allow herself to be charmed by this man. He was the enemy no matter what. She was still a loyal knight of Eos. Even if she was a prisoner, she would still resist him. No doubt he will try to gain information from her. Well, two can play at that game. She would just have to keep digging while giving him nothing worthwhile. He clapped his hands, causing a set of serving carts to begin wheeling themselves towards the table, undoubtedly guided by magic. "I didn't know what you liked, so I made a bit of everything. I tried asking your servants about your taste, but was lucky enough to only get some blubbering noises." The Uzumaki spoke as he lifted a dish cover, revealing a steamed dish of lobster, the scent making Alicia's mouth water. "You made this, you cook?" she asked, surprised by this. She never would have figured him to be good in the kitchen. Even though she could only see his back at the moment, she could tell that he was trying to suppress some laughter. He placed various pieces of food on a plate: lobster, steak, chicken, a variety of fruits and veggies, and some other things that she didn't immediately recognize, and placed the full plate in front of her. "What, you think that I had various slaves cook for me day and night?" he asked, which made the blonde knight give a long ooh as she found herself unable to reply or form a coherent sentence without sounding rude. The answer is no, I didn't. The dark arts weren't the only thing I learned in my mother's citadel. Cooking, in itself, is a form of magic. Good food has a way to bring happiness to people and bring smiles. Now, would you care for water or wine? Never mind. Don't answer. I'll just serve you both." He spoke as he placed 2 goblets in front of her, and with a wave of his finger, the goblets seemingly filled themselves. Water in one goblet and wine in the other. She stared at the 2 goblets in suspicion, not trusting the liquid contents. He might have mixed some sort of drugs in there to loosen her tongue or mess with her senses. Sensing her suspicions as she stared at the beverages, he picked up each cup and took a sip from each one, showing that they weren't tainted. "Come now, no need for suspicions. We're just having lunch together." He spoke casually as he went and prepared his own plate of food. He then snapped his fingers, resulting in the conjuring of the necessary eating utensils on the table. Seriously, what the hell was this guy's game? Whatever it was, she wouldn't fall for it right. "Lunch? You think I am stupid? You're going to try and get information out of me?" she snapped, glaring daggers at him. "Pot and kettle. You were and still are trying to do the same to me. Also, I don't think you're stupid. I think you're a stubborn but lovely young woman. I also know that you earned your position based on your own skills and merits and didn't coast off your family name. I like that in a person," he responded calmly as he placed his own plate on the table and sat across from her, picking up a fork and knife to begin cutting through a piece of steak. The 2 blondes stared at each other directly in the eyes, both sizing the other up in a tense silence. Alicia was the first to speak as her expression softened. "You're not what I expected. You honorably fought me when you could have cheated. You are treating me more like a guest than a prisoner, and thus far, aside from the widespread fear, no harm has come to my people. You must be thinking about what the Legion was before I took control. The monsters my mother employed were brutes and savages through and through. Kami, the things I heard them fantasize, made me want to jab out my eardrums. All they could think about was raping girls or destroying things. Well, I guess you can train an animal to follow certain commands, but at the end of the day they're still animals. Unless of course one is well versed in magic. He spoke with a chuckle. Alicia pursed her lips, her stomach starting to grumble loudly as the scent of delicious food tickled her nostrils and her mouth watered. She picked up her own utensils and jabbed her fork into a piece of lobster and placed it in her mouth, trying not to wolf down the meal. Goddess, hospital food always tasted so bland to her. She chewed a few moments before swallowing, then took a sip of water, the atmosphere relaxing a little. What was it like being raised by the Dark Queen, she asked out of curiosity, since Eos had been at war with Queen Olga for so long. It was impossible for her to imagine Olga as a maternal figure, especially given her well-known hatred for humans. Naruto was silent for a few moments, a nostalgic smile on his face as he replied, "My mother was as kind and caring as a mother could be. She constantly spoiled me and would let me get away with virtually anything. However, she was also firm and strict when necessary and was a diligent teacher. Thanks to her, I was able to cultivate a wide array of skills and abilities to serve as her general." "Why did she take you and where did she even find you?" the Princess Knight questioned further. The Uzumaki popped a strawberry into his mouth before taking a sip of wine, an easy smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes flashed with an emotion that she could only identify as hatred. He inhaled sharply and then replied, "Far East. I'm from the Far East, the Shinobi nations." The Princess Knight raised an eyebrow, name striking a familiar chord in her memory. She remembered her friend Kaguya talking about it, but she couldn't recall the necessary information. She would need to consult her library later to learn more. Still, he didn't explain why he was adopted by the Dark Queen. She was about to ask him again, but was interrupted when he spoke. "I admire your skills, Princess. You truly earned your position. A shame we have to be enemies." "Still not much to be done about that. Hey, in a few days' time, we'll be marching on the second fortress. To my knowledge, it is the least defended." "Yes, and it's the home of your cousin, Princess Prim." Alicia snarled as she pointed her knife at him and growled out, "You touch my cousin, and I'll kill you. I swear on the goddess' name that I will." As soon as the words left her mouth, a hand came over her mouth, silencing her, and a sharp object was pressed into her side. From the corner of her eye, she saw the form of Khloe, the half-elf, scowling deeply and silently threatening to gut her if she made any moves against the Forge Master. Naruto didn't seem intimidated in the slightest as he rolled a berry between his fingers and stated, "Come now, we've been down that road before. You lost. Is there any point in repeated history? I find it rather pitiable how humans always fail to learn from their past mistakes." "Oh, and Khloe, kindly release her." The blonde half-elf silently obliged and let go of the princess, sheathing her hidden dagger. She then stood beside the Uzumaki, her arms crossed beneath her bust as she glared at the princess, silently daring her to try anything further. "You know, that reminded me. Speaking of past mistakes, you ever wonder why we're at war to begin with?" Naruto asked as he leaned back in his seat. "Your beloved mother hates humans and has been waging war on us because of her grudge." Alicia answered, then she did a brief double-take as she realized that she sounded almost like a broken record. "Ah, you just realized that doesn't really answer the question, does it? What started this grudge to begin with?" the whiskered teen questioned. All Alicia could do in response was stare blankly at him. Just what was he getting at? Before she could ask him, they were interrupted when a small girl with short black hair, dark skin and pointed ears appeared. Another dark elf that was certainly a surprise. "Ah, Princess, allow me to introduce Luca, my personal retainer. Technically speaking, she's still in training. Found her in a slave market during one of my excursions around Eos to learn about the fortresses and the people. Poor thing was all bones, barely held together by her own skin." Naruto spoke with a grin, introducing the new girl. "Ah, so he traveled around Eos. That would explain how he knew so much. He did his research. Additionally, no one would find a traveling human suspicious. They had spent so long fearing the monsters of the Legion that they never imagined a human would be their foe. Slavery is illegal. Celestine-sama expressly forbade it and outlawed it." The princess spoke matter-of-factly, not believing that slavery was still alive in Eos. Just because something is forbidden or illegal doesn't mean people aren't doing it. Luca here is half human and half dark elf, in case you were wondering. "I digress though, is there something you needed?" Luca the whiskered teen asked his young retainer. The black-haired half-elf wrapped her arms around his neck, puffed out her cheeks and then spoke towards the princess. "You human wench, you are not worthy to join Naruto-sama's bed." There was a pregnant pause in the air as Alicia blinked her eyes. The only intelligent words that could escape her mouth was, "I what?" Luca smoothly slid into her master's lap and straddled him, possessively embracing him as she continued to shout at the princess, "You heard me, harpy lecher witch." At this, Naruto almost burst into laughter, and in the background, Khloe had clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle her giggles, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to contain herself. "Forgive me, I think that Luca has it in her head that you're trying to seduce me. Not sure where she got that from." The Uzumaki sincerely apologized and then continued, "Far as I know, she spent most of her life in a cage. She still doesn't understand certain topics and social cues or taboos. HMPH, it is all clear to me she is attempting the ritual of whining and dining." This fiendish woman is trying to use her wicked wiles to tempt you, Naruto-sama," Luca snarled out, hissing like a cat, which only made both Naruto and Khloe snicker. The Forge Master then sighed as he took on a more serious expression and stated bluntly, "Luca, stop. Now, you're embarrassing me and you're bothering Alicia. Do not make me punish you for your misconduct." He gently pushed his young retainer off of his lap, his words making her deflate, and began profusely apologizing for causing him embarrassment. "Now, was there something you actually needed?" he asked sternly, prompting his retainer to give a quick salute and reply back, "Yes. My apologies, a caravan has been seen approaching the fortress. It carries both a white flag and the standard of the second fortress." Prim, Alicia muttered beneath her breath, quickly coming to the conclusion that her cousin had come for her. If she was leading a caravan, then she had come with the intention of buying her freedom. Her captor came to the same conclusion, a little smirk on his face as he whispered orders to his retainer, no doubt telling her to show Prim inside. "And be sure to extend every courtesy," he added at the end, prompting the light half-elf to nod before departing. The Forge Master and Khloe exchanged looks and he gave her a dismissive wave, likely telling her that she can leave. "I will be nearby should you need me." Alicia smirked confidently, certain that her beloved cousin was prepared to offer any ransom for her freedom. Within a matter of minutes, Luca returned with the pink-haired princess herself in tow. "Alicia!" Prim shouted in delight and rushed forward, the two cousins lovingly embracing one another. The pinkette then inspected her cousin and asked in a rapid-fire manner, "Are you all right? Did they hurt you? What have they done to you?" "I'm fine, Prim, I'm fine. I was injured from my duel, but I am just fine. They haven't done anything to me." Alicia spoke reassuringly, quickly calming her cousin down. Naruto stood up and approached the pink-haired princess, who turned to face him. He then gently took her by the hand and at the top of it as he spoke, "Princess Prim, my name is Naruto Uzumaki Discordia, General of the Legion and Devil Forge Master. It's an honor and a privilege to meet you. Your cousin and I were just enjoying a meal. Care to join us?" The pinkette gave a graceful curtsy and replied back, "I'm afraid I must politely decline since I am not hungry, though if it is not too much trouble, a cup of tea would be splendid." In response to her request, the Uzumaki snapped his fingers, conjuring a tray with a teapot with a teacup with some cream and sugar on the side, followed by a third seat for Prim as he pulled it out for her and poured her a cup. "I will not waste your time. It doesn't take a military genius or a savant to figure out that you're here to negotiate for your cousin," Naruto stated matter-of-factly, earning a nod from the pinkette as she took her seat with her cousin taking her own seat once again. The pink-haired princess nodded in confirmation as she spoke calmly and gently, "Correct. It is my hope that we can come to an agreement. I have great wealth, a vast collection of rare and valuable antiquities and artifacts, and a considerable library of arcane tomes and magic. I am ready and willing to pay any price you deem fair for my cousin's safe return." The Forge Master leaned back in his seat, lacing his fingers together as slowly shook his head negatively and then spoke in an even tone again. "I don't want to waste your time since you came all this way here. However, I am not interested in coin or material possessions. That aside, everything that you have, I can simply take. Sorry to say, but you aren't in a good position to negotiate, especially since your fortress will be my next stop and I am certain that your military is tripping over themselves as they try to figure out whether to adopt an offensive or defensive strategy." The pinkette blinked her eyes a few times, briefly wondering if he had spies planted in the White Citadel as she blurted out without thinking, "How did you know that?" In response, he smirked as he answered her educated guesswork, "And thank you for confirming it for me. I messed up," Prim mentally screamed in her own mind, a horrified expression on her face as she realized her blunder. She then took a deep breath to collect herself, and her mortified expression was replaced by one of steely resolve. She removed one of her silk gloves and then threw it at the Uzumaki with all her might. He caught the thrown glove in his hand and inspected it, a knowing smile on his face as he muttered, "Going down that road, AIC." From the background, his loyal retainer appeared from the shadows with a confused expression, not understanding the gesture. Ever heard the phrase throwing down the gauntlet? Same basic principle. When a member of nobility or aristocracy throws their glove at someone, it means they are challenging them to a duel. If one refuses it without justifiable reason, then they are considered untrustworthy and without honor, Naruto explained, his hand clenching around the glove. He then continued to speak as he pocketed the silk glove. "Your challenge is accepted, Princess Prim. Though, please forgive me as I do not mean to insult or belittle you, but from what I have heard you're not exactly a fighter like your cousin." "You are correct. I am not a warrior, but nevertheless, I will put my life on the line for my people and more importantly for my friends and family," Prim stated as she produced a small pearl from her pocket and then continued, "This is my weapon. It is a poison called the Strangler. Naruto and I request at least 16 cups of tea for this game." At the mentioning of the name, Alicia paled until she was white as a sheet. One could almost assume that she had died right there from a heart attack. The Strangler, that poison is illegal in Eos. Where did you get that, Prim? Please don't do this. If you drink that, then the blonde princess blubbered, a mental image of her cousin dying from the poison entering her mind. "It will be fine, Alicia. You have always protected me from harm. It's time that I tried to protect you now. I'll save you," Prim stated with confidence, having full belief that she could take the win. A game of chance. This sort of game is known as Russian roulette. Not a traditional duel, but I won't refuse you. Naruto spoke as he snapped his fingers, conjuring exactly 16 cups of tea. The game ends when one of us dies from the poison or surrenders. Now then, I must ask you and your servant to turn around so that I may deposit the poison without you seeing. Once that is done, me and Alicia will turn around so you may shuffle the teacups. Then neither of us will know where the poison is. Agreed. Prim spoke in a clear voice, which earned a nod from her foe as he turned around and gestured for his retainer to do the same. Once their backs were turned and she ensured they were not peeking, Prim crushed the pearl in her fist, then dumped the powder in a random cup of tea. It is done. Shuffle them, she ordered as she turned around. Alicia was hesitant to do so, forcing Prim to grab her by the shoulder and make her face away from the cups. Take as long as you need. The Uzumaki didn't very answer, however they could hear the cups sliding around on the table in various directions. The shuffling went on for almost a full minute until the whiskered teen was satisfied. With that done, both parties faced each other once again. Prim, let me drink in your stead. I cannot bear. Alicia tried to speak but was shushed by her cousin, who was shaking her head negatively. Her mind was made up and she was going to see this through. Naruto-sama, I should. Luca tried to speak, but was silenced as her master gave her a scathing glare, cutting her off. It seemed she was going to extend the same offer of drinking in his place, but he shot her down flat. Mind if I take the first cup? Naruto asked while picking up one of the teacups. The Pinkette gestured for him to continue, silently hoping that perhaps the first cup may be the one to kill him and put an end to this nightmare. He sipped the liquid contents of the cup before setting it down, and after a few moments of waiting, nothing happened. The princess frowned as she glanced down at the cups. It was her turn now, and any one of them could have the deadly poison in it. Prim was neither a strong fighter or a valiant knight, but her heart was strong and her love for her cousin and her friends pushed her forward. She took a cup with all the grace and poise of someone of her station and sipped her tea before setting the cup down. She felt moisture forming on her body and her heart was pounding, but nothing happened. It would seem both their lives had been spared this round. Naruto picked up his second cup and drank the tea down, followed by Prim as she chose her own. Cup after cup, round after round, they continued on. The number of full cups dwindled and the stakes were rising. Prim felt as though her heart was about to pop inside of her own as they were now down to 3 cups. One of them contained the deadly poison. Her body was now soaked in sweat, and in the background both Alicia and Luca seemed almost ready to wet themselves in anticipation. Swallowing dryly, the Pinkette dabbed her damp forehead with a handkerchief and then snatched it up and gulped down the beverage, some droplets falling from her lips as she set the cup back down, only to feel relief when nothing happened. Now, it was down to the final 2 cups. It was now a 50/50 chance for her opponent to perish or succeed. This was the moment of truth. Naruto's hand hovered over a cup for a few moments, then he switched to the second one, then back again. Undoubtedly he was unsure which one to choose. Finally, he made his selection and picked up a cup and downed the potentially fatal liquid. The cousins silently waited, their hearts beating rapidly inside their s, each second feeling like a year as they waited to see whether or not the Forge Master would meet his end, but still nothing happened. He's not dead. He's not dead, Alicia muttered, her eyes widening as she and her cousin looked down at the last cup of tea. Prim began to tear up and sniffle, realizing that she had failed. There was no point in continuing further or dying a pointless death. She knew that there was a likelihood that either she or her foe would drink of the poison and perish, but she had never considered the possibility of what may happen if neither of them took the poison. I concede. I have failed. I'm so sorry, Alicia, I'm so useless. The pink-haired princess muttered. So you admit that you've lost then? Naruto asked, earning a reluctant nod from Prim. He then continued in an even tone, well, as the victor then, I hereby decree that you'll be staying here as an extended guest. Your entourage too, can of them leaving and potentially giving your sister Sinarm's vital information. Alicia wanted to protest, but remained quiet. Her cousin had lost the duel, and as the victor it was Naruto's right to claim the spoils. The blonde knight embraced her cousin in a comforting hug and spoke to her soothingly. You're not useless, Prim. You were very brave as any knight could ever be. Her words brought a little smile to her beloved cousin, who stifled her tears and wiped them away. Naruto smiled at the 2 princesses and then picked up the final cup of tea and stated, to your health, ladies. And in a shocking move he drank down the tea. The 2 cousins gaped and stared at him, their minds unable to process what had just happened. Had he just committed suicide? For what reason? What drove him to drink the poison? Their mouths opened and closed, unsure of what to say or do except wait for the poison to do its work, but then Luca began to snicker, which alerted the cousins that something was amiss, which was proven further by the fact that Naruto still didn't die. Apologies, ladies, but there's something you didn't know. I already drank the poison in the first cup. Phew. What was the only reply that the 2 princesses could mutter, completely flummoxed by this revelation. Just how in the hell was he not dead? Due to my unique circumstances, poison doesn't affect me. My body burns out any poison that enters me. I also possessed enhanced senses, and I noticed that one of the teacups had a slightly different smell than the rest, which made it easy for me to identify which one was the poison cup. I didn't want to run the risk of poor Prim drinking the poison, which is why I took the initiative and drank first. He explained as he set down the last cup. Ahaha, stupid humans, that's what you get for betting against Naruto-sama. He never loses a bet. You accidentally rigged the game in his favor, Luca shouted mockingly, and then began making obscene faces and insulting gestures to the princesses. Why keep going then? Why keep going if you had already won? Prim muttered almost brokenly. Thus far, everything that Kaguya said had held true up until now, when the poison was proven worthless against the Legion's general. Now she was his prisoner. Still, it didn't make any sense for him to continue the duel. He chuckled a bit as he replied to her question. Simple. I wanted to see just how far you'd go to save your cousin. You didn't disappoint. You held until the final cup. A lesser person would have given up long before that. You've got heart, Primline. A lot of heart. Much respect to you, my lady. That's still horrible. Poor Prim was scared to death. I was scared to death for Prim, Alicia snapped out, snarling at the Uzumaki. She seemed ready to lunge at him, but was stopped when Prim raised a hand, which made her cousin pause and quietly ask Prim, "Do not be angry with him. I issued the challenge and unknowingly stacked the deck against myself. This is all my fault. Also, as Naruto-san stated, I was in no danger. He was protecting me, and because of this I feel stronger and braver now." The pink-haired girl spoke to her cousin before turning towards the Legion General. As for you, Naruto-san, as a princess and a gentlewoman, I graciously accept my defeat. You may do with me as you wish. However, if you think that you'll be taking my fortress, I made arrangements in the event that I failed to kill you, Prim boldly announced, standing defiantly towards the Uzumaki. He simply smiled and replied in a confident tone, "That's good. That's very good. I enjoy a good fight and a challenge. Whatever arrangements you made, I hope they're entertaining." Both princesses stood tall and glared at him, refusing to back down. He may have 2 of the 7 Alliance princesses now, but the war wasn't over yet. In the White Citadel, the Princess Knights had convened once again. Celestine was ready to disclose her decision. However, 2 members of their number were missing. One, they knew, had been captured by the enemy. But the other princess, Prim, was nowhere to be found, and she was not the type to arrive late without a good reason. They agreed to wait for a little longer, expecting the young Pinkette to come through the doors at any moment and showering them with apologies for making them wait, but still she didn't arrive. Not like Primchin to hold things up, Maya muttered as she took a long drink from a tankard of ale, glaring at the entrance to the meeting chambers. "Oh dear, I hope nothing bad has happened," Celestine muttered in a worried tone, placing an open palm against her cheek. Had Prim gotten into an accident of some sort? You think her Smy suitors are badgering her again? If they're bothering Primchin again, then Ruru will bite them a lot, and they will all hate it, the halfling shouted while gnashing her teeth for emphasis. The other princesses giggled a bit at Ruru's protective and energetic nature. Still, there was definitely a possibility. Prim had countless suitors that sought her hand in marriage, her cousin Alicia often being the one to chase them away. If poor Prim was being heckled by more suitors, then it was no wonder she was late. On a side note, why was Ruru so obsessed with biting people? The doors to the meeting chambers opened, and the various princesses smiled, believing their comrade had finally arrived. However, it was not Prim that entered. It was a woman with dark skin and silver hair, a pair of wolf ears atop her head, identifying her status as a beastwoman, and a large 2-handed sword strapped to her back. She was accompanied by the form of Claudia's father-in-law, Graves, who had a stern expression on his face. Maya was the first to recognize the wolf woman and spoke up, "Holy shit. That's Leona, the boss of the Hekuro Mercenary Company." The now identified Leona stepped forward and began to explain herself. "Apologies for the sudden intrusion, but it is my regret to inform you that your Princess Prim has been taken by the enemy." Dead silence permeated the room as everyone could only stare in shock at this news. Sensing the oncoming barrage of questions, the silver-haired woman continued. "The princess approached the enemy under a white flag in order to attempt negotiating a ransom for her cousin. My scouts report that she and her caravan entered the first fortress, but never came back out. Before she went on this mission, she contracted me and my mercenaries to guard the second fortress for her and to pass the word along if she failed or succeeded." Most of the Princess Knights could only stare blankly in shock, the one exception being Kaguya, who seemed to be in deep concentration, her lips moving silently as if she was whispering a mantra. The first to snap out of their stupor was Claudia as she slammed a fist into the table, creating a series of large cracks across the marble surface as she shouted, "Those heathens, have they no honor, taking a defenseless girl under a white flag?" Graves crossed his arms and huffed as he spoke in a callous tone, "What a foolish girl. There is no negotiating with the Legion. We're all just meat to them. So what, she should have just left her cousin in there," Maya shouted as she threw her now empty bottle at the aged knight's head, making him lean to the side, allowing the bottle to sail harmlessly past him. The crimson-haired woman then jumped from her seat and shouted, "That is it, I am dunning around. We are all going to march on the Legion and get our friends back." This earned a cheer from Ruru, who was now wildly swinging her axe around. Claudia nodded in agreement as she drew her blade, and Kaguya broke from her meditation, her face a blank mask as she slowly nodded as well. "I'm afraid that the final decision lies with Celestine-sama," Graves muttered with a deep frown, not liking where things were going with this. The high elf nodded as she stood to her full height and began to speak. "Indeed, I am afraid that the decision has been made for us. We will." She left her sentence hanging at the end, a dizzy spell overcoming as her vision began to swim and blur. "We will," she tried to finish, but the words wouldn't come out as she felt her body heating up. "Is something wrong, Celestine-sama? You don't look well." The goddess' loyal bodyguard noted, seeing that the high elf was becoming pale, and then she saw crimson droplets leaking from her nose. Celestine-sama, you're bleeding, Claudia shouted, with the other princesses staring in surprise and worry. Celestine placed 2 of her fingertips to her nose and then pulled them back, seeing the crimson liquid staining her fingers. Then her eyes rolled into her head as she collapsed like a puppet with its strings being cut, only just barely hitting the floor thanks to the quick intervention of Claudia and Maya, who managed to catch her in time. "Doctor, somebody summon a doctor," Claudia shouted out. Ruru immediately rushed out of the meeting chambers to seek help. The elf goddess' breath was shaky and uneven, all the while her dear friends tried in vain to comfort her and keep her calm, all the while trying to figure out what was wrong with her. In the background, Kaguya pulled out a trio of leaves hidden inside her sleeves and inserted them into her mouth, closing her eyes as she began chewing on them. "Now is not the time for snacking," Maya snapped angrily at the priestess, but the black-haired woman didn't react as she approached. Celestine's twitching and spasming on the floor. Kaguya then placed her lips over the blonde elf's own and used her tongue to push the chewed-up leaves into the goddess' mouth. "Swallow," she ordered, and tilted Celestine's head back to assist her in gulping down the contents in her mouth. The goddess' throat bobbed, signaling that she had swallowed, and color began to return to her face and her breathing relaxed and steadied. The others stared in amazement at this scene. Whatever the priestess had given the high elf, it worked like magic. The Hellgraves muttered, the others slowly nodding, since that perfectly summed up what had happened. They all turned to the aloof priestess, their eyes silently demanding an explanation. Standing back to her full height, Kaguya then spoke. "My God told me that someone would attempt to do harm to Celestine-sama and to keep those herbs on hand to prevent her demise. Who would do such a horrible thing? Celestine-sama is a saint. She couldn't and wouldn't even harm a fly," Claudia demanded angrily, her fist clenching tightly and her eyes blazing with red-hot fury. "Is it not obvious the Legion are behind this? They have poisoned her. There is no other explanation for this. Our indecision has left us open and vulnerable to the enemy. We have to prepare ourselves before it is too late," Graves shouted, earning a nod of agreement from his daughter-in-law. Normally, Claudia was a calm and collected individual who supported her beloved friend and charges ideals of peace. Now she held nothing but rage in her heart, her serene demeanor giving way to her growing hatred. Due to her skill in battle and role as the bodyguard of the goddess herself, people refer to her as the invincible Valkyrie, and she was going to show the Legion exactly why she had earned that epithet. However, there was something else that needed to be addressed. "Kaguya, you knew this would happen. Why didn't you say anything?" the Valkyrie asked, glaring heatedly at the priestess, who was currently cleaning from Celestine's face with a cloth. Both Maya and Graves looked at the priestess in suspicion, the former having a softer expression as she hoped that there was a good explanation for why Kaguya hadn't said anything. "I would have, but my God forbade it. If I had said anything, then Celestine-sama would surely have died," the priestess explained calmly, her words prompting Graves to grab her by her robes and pull her up to eye level as he stared deeply into her eyes. "We're going to need more than that. We have tolerated you and your beliefs in your foreign god for too long. You had better start talking," the aged warrior shouted, causing large droplets of saliva to splash onto the priestess' face, but she remained unflinching and unfazed as she stared back with a listless expression. "I am not the enemy. The real enemy is still after Celestine-sama's life," Kaguya responded slowly and carefully, which seemed to anger the old soldier further. He seemed almost ready to strangle the priestess to death, but was stopped by his daughter-in-law, who placed a hand on his shoulder. "She is right, the Legion are still out there. Who knows what they may be plotting? I have known Kage-san for some time now, and Celestine-sama also trusted her. I know for a fact she wouldn't do anything without just cause, and she would never do harm to Celestine-sama. As we witnessed just now, she gave her the antidote to what ailed her." Claudia spoke to her father-in-law, attempting to calm him. "Convenient how she happened to have the antidote on hand. Perhaps she is the assassin?" the aged man questioned, earning a small scoff from Maya, who gave a look that said, "Are you serious? You going senile, you old shit? If she was the assassin, then she could have just let Celestine-sama die. We need to figure out how she was poisoned to begin with so that it won't happen again," Maya shouted angrily, and then reached up and pulled the priestess out of Graves' grip. Kaguya simply straightened her hair and clothes in a relaxed manner, completely ignoring the fact that she could have been throttled. Even in his old age, Graves Levantine was still known for his great strength. Had he attempted to strangle her, her throat would have easily been crushed. Leona remained in the background, largely forgotten by everyone as she observed the scene before her. "If you have time to point fingers, then you have time to take the fight to the Legion." The wolf woman finally spoke up, earning the attention of everyone. She then continued, "While you're yelling and playing whodunit, the Legion are still out there and could penetrate deeper into Alliance territory at any time. If the enemy's goal was to divide us, it would seem they are succeeding." The room fell into silence at her words as the princesses and the old knight exchanged looks and silently came to agree with her statement. She was right. If they continued arguing, then nothing would get done and then the war would be lost. Suddenly, Ruru burst into the chambers with a female bishop in tow. "Help has arrived. Is she alive? Tell Ruru that Celestine is alive. If nobody says something, then Ruru is gonna scream and bite everyone," the little halfling shouted, bouncing up and down with tears in her eyes. "She is alive. I had the antidote," Kaguya spoke, sparing everyone's eardrums from rupturing. The last person who made Ruru scream at the top of her lungs ended up losing their sense of hearing. The attack dog then quickly wrapped her little arms around the priestess' waist, anime tears falling down her face as she cried out, "Well, thank you so much," the halfling wailed, her words becoming incoherent as tears and snot fell down her face. There. The black-haired girl spoke gently and soothingly patted the orangette's head to calm her. The halfling then broke off the hug and bounced back, wildly swinging her battle axe with reckless abandon, making everyone step back to avoid getting hit by it. Who did this? Uru-sama demands to know. Ru will kill them all. Ru will find them and chop them up and bite them and do horrible things to them. Ru will do it. Yes, Ru will deliver unimaginable pain and torture on them and bite them, the enraged halfling shouted, making Maya gulp nervously in the background, since halflings were known for three things. First, they were known for their unwavering loyalty to their friends and family. Secondly, they were an all-female race that was supposedly capable of mating with any species. Thirdly, despite their tiny frames, they were inhumanely strong, especially when enraged. On one occasion, an enormous bear stole Ruru's food when she went to do her business in the woods. When she found the bear helping itself to her foodstuff, the halfling princess flew into a rage and wrestled down that bear using only her hands and even broke its spine. Leona stepped forward and stopped the halfling princess axe with her large sword, causing sparks to fly. If it is your wish to fight, then come with me. We shall face the Legion together at the second fortress. Everyone, we will hold the second fortress as long as possible. You marshal your forces so that we may mount a counterattack against the Legion. The beastwoman spoke, causing the orangette's eyes to light up and sparkle. Yes, Rusama will fight too, the halfling stated excitedly, and then turned towards the goddess bodyguard and said, Ruru will let you take command of the halfling army for now. Rusama is finally off to war. With that said, the halfling and beastwoman made their exit, leaving the others behind. Now then, Claudia, I may have a plan. With Leona's assistance we may be able to turn things around, Graves muttered, causing his daughter-in-law to slowly turn to him, ready to listen to his strategy now. No matter what, she would avenge her friend. She would not let this attempt on Celestine's life go unpunished. Before we speak on any further matters regarding the war, we should get Celestine-sama to her chamber so that she may rest and be better protected, the female bishop stated, earning a series of nods from the others. Claudia picked up the elven goddess in a bridal carry and took her away to her private chamber so that she may recover in peace. Kaguya approached the bishop and stated, You are Bishop Eleonora Byrne. The female bishop turned and bowed slightly before replying, Correct. Though some refer to me as Bishop L for short. I don't believe we have met before now. We have not, the priestess stated before closing her eyes and seemed to be silently praying until she spoke aloud again. I shall pray for Celestine-sama's safety. This war is going to get much uglier before things get better. Indeed, I cannot imagine just how much worse things can get, or maybe I simply don't want to. Eleonora spoke as she too joined in prayer, praying to the goddess for protection. Once she was done praying, she followed after the Valkyrie so that she may further tend to Celestine. Kaguya said nothing as she returned to her own prayers to her mysterious god. During this time, Maya was currently deep in her own thoughts as she adopted a thinking pose. Kaguya was right, things were going to get worse. Much worse. Something had to be done, and fast. Meanwhile, First Fortress. Naruto hummed a merry tune to himself as he walked along the hallways of his fortress, passing by human servants and his demonic soldiers, both of which he ignored. He had received summons from his mother, demanding his presence to speak of important matters. No doubt it would involve her loss of magic and perhaps the invasion. Their next stop being the second fortress, which possessed the strongest defenses in the alliance. When he had earlier stated that it was the least defended, he had meant that it was manned by a skeleton crew, militia mostly, and a few of the Furrier family's own soldiers. Prim had not said anything about her arrangements, but Naruto guessed that she must have hired a mercenary company. No surprise there. When a war drags on for centuries, there is no shortage of mercenaries to hire. His former homelands, the Shinobi nations, were proof of that. He entered a chamber, decorated with black marble, and found his mother in only her birthday suit, reclining on a chair as Khloe knelt down in front of her, massaging her queen's long legs, kneading them and pouring warm oil on her body. Naruto, welcome. The queen greeted him in a somewhat lazy voice, obviously enjoying the oil massage. Her dark skin glistened in the light, which made her naked body all the more erotic. The whiskered teen smiled at his mother, feeling rushing to his loins. She took notice of the bulge growing in his pants and spoke in a teasing voice, It seems someone is getting excited. How long has it been since you last received some relief? Too long. Been busy, invading a nation, capturing princesses, and sorting through the Prime Minister's grimy stain-covered paperwork had been something of a grind, especially the last part. He replied at the end with a grimace, earning some looks of disgust from the Dark Elves, which was replaced by a soft from the Queen as her loyal aide began massaging the arches of her feet. Anything of interest? His mother questioned, wondering if the Prime Minister had any more skeletons in his closet. The more ammunition they had against him, the easier it would be to convince the people that she was obviously the superior. And more fair rules. Happy and content people are the easiest to control after all. Fear and terror could only go so far in subduing the sheep. Any tyrant can become feared, but a true ruler is at least respected if not completely loved by their subjects. Quite a bit. He's been stealing goods and embezzling money for his own dirty dealings. Nobody noticed since he was the one that supervised and kept track of everything, so there was no real oversight to keep him in check. He also hosted lavish underground parties to try and curry favor and cut deals with various nobles. He also spent this coin on prostitutes, young blonde ones, the Whiskered team reported, causing both Khloe and Olga to start turning a little green. Please, talk about something else. I am in the middle of something here and I do not wish to vomit on Olga-sama, Khloe pleaded, earning an apologetic look from the Uzumaki as he gave a quick sorry. Olga cleared her throat, letting out a soft as Khloe began massaging her thighs and then spoke, "Very good, my child. We can take advantage of this information. Also, I am going to arrange for a masquerade to take place. I think you might enjoy it." The Whiskered teen tilted his head slightly and replied, "Already a bit early to be celebrating, don't you think?" "Perhaps a bit, or perhaps not. Not only did you capture the first fortress with ease and terminate the Kuroinu, you have also claimed 2 of the 7 princesses in a very short amount of time. I'd say that calls for a little celebration. Additionally, all the nobility within the fortress will be gathered there and I plan to extract promises of loyalty and support from them," Olga explained, earning a nod of understanding from her son. "Not that I wish to question you, Olga-sama, but do you really think the nobility will stay loyal to you or keep their promises?" Khloe asked, her hands moving up her queen's body and began massaging her smooth stomach. "Of course not, but having them under my heel will make things easier in the long run. That aside, if they try to turn against me or undermine our operations, I shall leave my dear child to deal with them." The queen spoke with a devious little grin, knowing full well what happens to those who attempt to harm her or betray her. "Leave it to me," the blonde teen replied and gave a dramatic bow, earning an appreciative smile from his mother. Her face took on a more grave expression as she clapped her hands twice, causing her aide to cease massaging her body and quickly fetched a towel and robe for her queen. "One more thing, and perhaps most importantly, I believe I have found the reason behind my lack of magic," Olga stated, her expression hard as stone and her voice as sharp as a flint. "I'm listening." Naruto spoke as he approached her while Khloe began patting down and drying off the queen's body and retrieved the purple bathrobe from the blonde half-elf. "After running some tests and consulting my books, I have successfully determined that I am afflicted with some form of a curse. Powerful and forbidden magic." She spoke, her voice filled with venom, her eyes glaring daggers. "That explains a bit. Vult and his men march on you, bust into your castle. The curse hits you and you're rendered powerless, enabling him to the Uzumaki stated, piecing things together as he helped slip the robe onto his mother's form. He then pressed his body to hers, tying the sash around her waist and inhaling her sweet scent. "Indeed, in theory, if we find the source of this curse, we can end it and my power will return, though I think we both know who is behind this. Until that point of time I will need to take advantage of you, in more ways than one." Olga spoke in a husky voice, her cheeks taking on a dusting of pink as she reached down and grabbed her son's groin. "From the feel of it, his S must be so full that it must be painful for him. Feel free. I am and always will be yours. Your general, your shield, your son, your pet or plaything. Anything for you. Because I love you, mother." Naruto spoke and edged the nape of his mother's neck. Just off to the side, Khloe watched the scene with a slight hint of jealousy, seemingly wanting to join in with perhaps the only 2 people she loves wholeheartedly. Olga knew that Naruto would do anything to please her. He would do anything for the ones he loves. Plus, he enjoyed experimenting and trying out different things in the bedroom to better please his lovers. She then gave a sadistic smile and stepped away from her son as she spoke later, "My dear child, we have a party to plan and besides, the pleasure of your release will be greatly heightened after you've been blued a bit." "You're so cruel." "Tease," Naruto replied in a mock-hurt tone, earning giggles from the 2 dark elves. The Forge Master then inwardly frowned to whoever it was that had cursed his mother and set her and Khloe up to be toys. Death would be too great a kindness for them. Elsewhere, the 2 princesses Alicia and Prim sat together in a comfortable silence, the latter sipping a cup of tea and the former staring out the window, observing a bird's nest that was tucked into a tree branch, a mother bird feeding her hatchlings. Alicia turned to her cousin, noting that the pinkette was now wearing a tracking collar like she was, which was now tied around Prim's ankle. "Is something wrong, Alicia? And you seem like there's something on your mind," Prim noted as she set her cup down, which prompted the blonde princess to slightly frown and rest her chin on an open palm. "I just don't get it," the knight muttered, her fingers drumming on the table, and then she gestured at the room they shared. A comfortable suite that was fit for royalty as she continued to speak. "We're in the enemy's hands, and yet we're being treated more like guests than prisoners. We're not rotting in a goddess-forsaken prison. He doesn't seem interested in showing us off or flaunting us as his trophies. More than that, he saved you from that poison instead of letting you die. I just don't understand that guy." Prim closed her eyes for a few moments and then spoke. "I haven't been his captive for long, but from first impressions, I don't think that Naruto-san is a bad person. Still, I wish I knew why he would support Olga-san and her conquests, aside from the obvious, of course." The blonde princess slowly nodded and replied, "Yeah, he didn't say it outright, but when he came to get me from the hospital he said something odd. I think that maybe something bad happened to him when he was a child. He then hinted that there was something more to why Olga has been waging war against us, but he didn't elaborate on it. I almost forgot he mentioned he was from the Far East like Kaguya, that he came from the Shinobi Nations. Do you recall anything about that? Shinobi Nations, I remember the name at least. I do remember Kagayachin telling me about them once, but I can't remember. Something about them being in an almost constant state of war, and not much else. Prim muttered in an unsure tone. That's more than I remember. Still, just what is his game? The blonde girl muttered. Thus far, the Forge Master had conducted himself in an honorable manner and was most definitely not a typical Legion marauder. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at their door, prompting the two princesses to call out, "Come in unison." Unsurprisingly, when the door opened, the form of their captor stepped inside, except he was accompanied by the forms of two dark elves. One Alicia recognized as the woman that accompanied him during their duel, Khloe. The other one they hadn't seen before, but they both had a strong idea of who she was. "Ladies, allow me to introduce my dear mother and queen, Olga Discordia, and her retainer Khloe." Naruto spoke, introducing the two elven women. Prim immediately swept into a polite and graceful curtsy, a gesture that the queen returned in kind, while Alicia crossed her arms and stood defiantly, glaring at the Dark Queen. The person they had been fighting against for years, the woman who plunged Oz into a constant state of war. "I see the nasty little one isn't with you," Alicia muttered, still remembering Luca's earlier rudeness. How dare she insinuate that she was trying to seduce Naruto? What even gave her that idea? Just thinking about being in bed with the enemy made her feel dirty. "Oh Luca, she's taking care of some things for me," Naruto answered as he leaned back against a wall. His mother approached the two princesses, a strange little smile on her face as she took in their forms. Noticing the pink-haired girl had a somewhat fearful look at being in her presence, while the blonde princess seemed like she wanted to strike the Dark Queen down if she had a weapon in her hand. She let out a soft laugh and then spoke in a tone of amusement to the 7 princess knights. "Alicia and Prim, we meet at last. I know what you think of me. It is no secret that everyone in Eos thinks of me as nothing but a monster or a warmonger, an evil dark elf with a grudge against humankind. Are you going to tell us that is all untrue, that you have waged war in Eos for years and years out of love and compassion for humans?" Alicia asked sarcastically, her words making Khloe growl slightly under her breath, ready to pounce on the blonde knight for her insolence, but was stopped when her queen raised a hand. "No, I do hate humans, with a deep passion, with the exclusion of my beloved child, of course," the queen added, gesturing to her son, who gave a small 2-fingered salute as Olga continued. "I just want you to hear my side of the story. Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant, though maybe it will help you better understand my motives. Correct me if I am wrong, but prior to the founding of the church, the history of Eos largely remains a blank slate, yes. According to the texts, the people of Eos fled from a foreign nation that was embroiled in a big war that spanned the continent." Prim spoke up, having thoroughly studied history over the course of her education. "A very expensive education." The queen nodded in acknowledgement and then stated matter-of-factly, "True, but that is but a tiny piece of a much larger truth. One that has many holes poked into it by those in power and further deteriorated by time itself. Long ago, before humans even set foot on Eos, it was inhabited by the peaceful and compassionate High Elves and the wild and proud Dark Elves. One day, humans began to arrive in droves, refugees fleeing from their war-torn homelands as previously stated by Princess Prim. The High Elves quickly welcomed these newcomers with open arms, helping them settle and colonize the land to help them make a new home. The Dark Elves, however, were far more wary. Humans are complex and fickle creatures, and even the most well-meaning human can easily fall into the darkness. Time passed, and as the humans grew stronger and more numerous, they began aggressively expanding. The High Elves peacefully integrated themselves into this burgeoning human society. Meanwhile, we Dark Elves chose to live free as we always did in the wilds, far away from the influence of outsiders. As the years dragged on, both High Elves and Dark Elves became fewer and fewer in number within Eos. Humans have a funny way of breeding rapidly if given the chance. Eventually, what you know as the Church of Laurentia came to be, a religion that came to worship a member of the High Elves who possessed the power of clairvoyance and helped avert many disasters. However, behind the scenes, beneath the grandeur and splendor of the church, something much darker was brewing. What was once meant to be a bastion of peace and equality for all became twisted and corrupt, how and when I do not know. We Dark Elves were declared as corrupt beings and enemies of the goddess. We were hunted down for decades upon decades. Humans took many of my people as slaves, either for their twisted pleasure or for coin. Slowly but surely, my people were bred out or snuffed out by humans. Our lands and homes despoiled, and our High Elven cousins remained ignorant of everything, blinded by the love and praise given to them by the humans, even as they slowly dwindled in number as well. Eventually, I was one of, if not the last pure-red Dark Elf in Eos. All of my friends and family, almost all of my people, dead or enslaved by humankind and the humans who worship a living goddess. A High Elf, a non-human, celebrated our demise, unfeeling and unsympathetic to our plight because we were dirty Dark Elves. I then made a resolution that I would tear the church down to the ground, with my bare hands if necessary. So I formed the Legion to avenge my fallen people and destroy the church. The sad reality is that for all the preaching your church spews about love for others, it only applies to humans. The only reason they worship your current goddess Celestine is due to her clairvoyance, which they use for their own convenience. My army was strong but undisciplined, cobbled together from scratch. Monsters and brutes who only knew how to violate and despoil. The only thing keeping my army together was my own will and my ability to empower others. They were not the ideal army given their immoral nature, but I needed an army to fight the church. Then, quite ironically, a human child changed everything. The queen finished gesturing to her son once again, a look of deep nostalgia on her face, complete with a warm smile. At the end of her story, both of the princesses exchanged looks of uncertainty. On the one hand, it was certainly a sad story. Her people, her homelands, forcibly taken and defiled by humans who just kept on taking, and their cousins, the High Elves, remained ignorant of it all as they were worshipped. On the other hand, there was no proof of what she was saying. Her words could be little more than a ploy to mess with their heads and gain some form of sympathy. You don't believe me, Olga stated bluntly. She then gave a dismissive scoff and added, your belief is irrelevant to me, as I previously stated. However, mark my words, the church is now a cesspool of corruption. They shackle the minds of those who follow them, and despoil and destroy those that won't. Whoever they were when they were originally founded, it has long since been twisted into something ugly and wrong, and I will see the sins of the church dragged into the light and exposed for all to see. I just hope that you can arrive at the truth for yourselves before it is too late. With that said, the Dark Elf Queen turned on her heel and departed and made her way to the door, but before she exited the room Olga spoke. I almost forgot. My apologies. You're both invited to our masquerade that is being held tonight, and your presence is mandatory. Until our next meeting, my dears. With that said, Olga exited the room with her ever-present retainer following behind, leaving her child alone with the princesses. He slowly approached them, his hands on his hips while shaking his head as he spoke with a slightly saddened expression. I think my mother has been holding that in for a while. She's been wanting to tell people her story for a long time. I think that, deep down, she is a really lonely person. Something I understand all too well, being alone. But now's not the time for sadness. It is now a time to have fun, he exclaimed at the end in an excited and chipper manner, surprising the two princesses at how quickly his mood changed. Now let's see about getting you two ready. You're going to need masks and dresses. For Primheim, I'm thinking of a butterfly theme. Naruto muttered, snapping his fingers, causing a beautiful pink and white dress to appear before the gentle princess, along with a butterfly mask. For Alicia, something bolder, I think. Let's see, you're strong and brave and loyal, and you'd do anything to protect your cousin. I'm thinking that a wolf theme would suit you, the Uzumaki said, snapping his fingers once again, which caused a dark blue and black dress to appear with a silver-colored wolf mask. He then waved his hand, placing a dividing screen between himself and the two princesses as their respective dresses floated into their hands. Try them on for size, if you don't mind. They may need adjusting. The Forge Master directed. The princesses didn't like that they were being forced to attend a hosted by their enemy, but there was no choice in the matter given their present predicaments as prisoners. They slipped off their usual clothes and tried on their new dresses, and were surprised to find that they fit very comfortably. Alicia had to admit he was pretty good with magic. She had seen many magic users during her time as a princess knight, all of varying degrees of skill, and many had difficulty performing even the most simple of spells. Naruto, though he seemed capable of conjuring most anything within reason, plus he was a Forge Master, there was no telling just how truly skilled he was. As a matter of fact, she doubted that he had yet to use his true power. The dresses fit okay, I kind of had to make rough estimates. Naruto admitted from his side of the divider, his question prompting the two cousins to respond in unison with a quick yes. You seem quite skilled and comfortable with using magic. Is there anything you can't do? The blonde princess asked, hoping to prod her fellow blonde a bit, who simply chuckled at her inquiry. Not that I wish to boast, but due to my unique circumstances, I have virtually inexhaustible reserves of energy. The whiskered teen answered, his words making the knight quirk up an eyebrow. There was that phrase again, one that he had used before, unique circumstances. What circumstances are those? Prim asked, unknowingly asking the very question her blonde cousin was about to utter. The Uzumaki simply smiled, which went unseen thanks to the divider as he placed a hand over his stomach for a brief moment before clenching his fist. He then relaxed and stated, apologies ladies, but I must be going now. I have some things to attend before I'll see you both tonight. The two princesses then heard the sounds of his retreating footsteps and the door closing behind him, leaving the two princesses alone. They exchanged looks. It would seem that Naruto's history would still remain a mystery for now. However, bit by bit, they were learning more about him. It was only a matter of time before they found the kink in his armor and discovered his past. Meanwhile, Alicia's former office. Luca hummed merrily to herself as she diligently polished her master's dancing shoes to a mirror shine. His clothes were clean, pressed, free of lint, and his signature Hanya mask had also been clean and polished as well. Before she met Naruto, she was just one of many orphan slave girls being sold on the black market, except that she had the distinction of being a dark elf, which made her both rare and valuable. A premium collector's item as many of the slave merchants called her. She remembered being crammed in a too-small cage, being fed half-eaten scraps and lying in her own filth, being told about what would become of her day after day by her captors. The things they said still gave her nightmares to this day. Then, out of nowhere, she was bought and taken by the human who would become her master. In those first days, she would constantly hurl insults at him and threaten him if he ever touched her, fearing that he had only taken her for whatever demented and depraved pleasures he had in mind. Instead, he treated her with nothing but kindness and patience. He fed her good food, gave her a large room that had a big bathtub. He taught her to read, to write, to fight, and many other things. Whenever she did something wrong, he didn't beat her or yell at her or say cruel things to her or threaten her. Ever calm and patient, he would gently correct her and help her figure out how to do better and avoid making further mistakes, and would only ever punish her if she stepped over the line. Without him, she would have just been another nameless slave, used and abused until she died. Then her body would have been thrown into the trash and forgotten about. She hated humans with extreme prejudice like her friend Khloe, who was also a former slave, but her master Naruto, he was special. Truly and utterly special. She would happily serve him, protect him, kill for him, and if he so demanded or asked, she would happily bear him as many children as her body could handle. Anything he wanted, it was his. No questions asked. Now if only he would start paying more attention to her than those damned human princesses. What was he thinking? Surely he couldn't be thinking of claiming them as potential mates. Just imagining him in bed with those damned humans just made her skin crawl. I know that look. You're feeling jealous, aren't you? Spoke the form of her master, making the black-haired girl stiffen up and turn around, facing her master who was now sitting at a desk. Seriously, how did he walk so silently? It was almost inhuman. She didn't even sense his presence, even with the enhanced senses she was gifted due to being an elf. Jealous me? How ludicrous! Those prissy and weak human princesses have nothing on a proud dark elf like me, Luca shouted in denial, making her master chuckle a bit. I never said anything about the princesses. Luca, come here. Her master instructed, making a come hither motion with a lone finger. She obeyed him without question and approached, and as soon as she was within arm's reach, the Uzumaki lifted her into his lap, one hand supporting her by holding her back and the other cupping her chin. Now don't you fret, Luca. No one, nothing could ever replace you. You have no reason to be jealous. He spoke to her in a comforting tone, planting a quick peck on her lips which made the young elf smile warmly, but it soon fell as she muttered, I still don't like it. Those girls, they aren't worthy of you. Because they are human, or because you think that if I have other girls and lovers that you won't have my attention and that you'll be forgotten about in the background? Her master questioned in a slightly more stern tone, causing his loyal retainer to look away in shame, which only confirmed his suspicions. I promise you, Luca, you won't be forgotten about even if I were to take multiple wives or lovers. There will be no special treatment and no playing favorites. Now, please try not to worry or fret. You are and will always be my retainer, and if I desire it more than that. He whispered the last part, planting a longer and deeper to her soft lips, making the young half-elf into a sense of bliss coming over her, wishing that this moment could last forever. Being embraced and led by the person who matters most to her. The only thing that could make this moment better was if he were to demand that she bear his babies and force her down on the desk and take her right there. He then broke off and he traced a lone finger on her cheek, making her shudder in delight. As you wish, Naruto-sama. Whatever you desire, I am yours. Your happiness means more to me than anything else in the world. He slowly nodded and then gestured towards a map in front of them on the desk. Did you prepare everything like I asked? At his question, Luca almost immediately leapt off his lap and ripped open a nearby drawer and started pulling out small figurines from it, all the while muttering herself and calling herself things like stupid and useless. She then arranged the figurines at various landmarks on the map, each one bearing the likeness of either the princess knights, common soldiers, and of course their ones that resembled her master and the Queen Olga herself. Once she was finished, Naruto nodded in satisfaction and began surveying the map while pulling out some don'ts that he had procured from Beardsley's former office. If there is one thing I have to say about that old petticreep Beardsley, he had a good filing system for important don'ts. The whiskered teen spoke in a half-joking and half-serious tone. Our army is strong, but I am the sole commanding officer that leads it. I still have yet to find potential commanders and leaders to help lighten the workload. We also don't have a viable spy network as of yet, so the gathering of information is limited at best. Most of the information I gathered during my excursions may be outdated. Fortunately, old Beardsley's papers can help rectify that for now. Naruto muttered as he stared at the figurine of himself and Alga at the first fortress. If it is your wish, Naruto-sama, I will proudly lead your troops into battle and kill many enemies in your name, Luca declared, which made her master chuckle and appreciatively pat the top of her head. Thanks for the offer, Luca, but you're still in training. I couldn't bear the thought of sending you into open battle unprepared, much less losing you. Regrettably, my options for officers are virtually non-existent. Mindless drones and demonic beasts don't make for good leaders. My mother has no access to her magic, so she would be vulnerable, and Khloe wishes to remain by her side to protect her from harm. So that leaves me to lead the army by myself. He spoke thoughtfully before he pointed towards the map, more specifically at the Black Citadel, their home. I left a garrison of troops here to protect our home in case we need to fall back. Doubtful that it happened, but best not to leave things to chance or get careless. He then pointed up towards the second fortress, their next target, and continued according to the former Prime Minister's papers. There's a paltry force of some 150 men protecting the second fortress, most of them being volunteers or militia. Ah, stupid humans, the most defensible fortress having almost no soldiers to defend it. That's so pathetic it makes me want to laugh in their faces. Human arrogance truly knows no boundaries, Luca loudly exclaimed while laughing in amusement, her master sharing in this as he chuckled as well. I guess they didn't figure that the Legion would so easily make it past the first fortress. You're right though, it is pathetic. Still, Princess Prim must have hired mercenaries to bolster the number of troops defending her fortress. Until we know who and what we're dealing with, it'd be best not to become overconfident ourselves. I refuse to underestimate my foes under any circumstances, the whiskered teen muttered as he turned his attention to the next landmark on the map, the third fortress. The third fortress is governed by the priestess Kaguya. She's from the east like me, though not from the Shinobi nations. According to the correspondence, there are approximately 1,500 church soldiers guarding it, along with 300 of Kaguya's private army of acolytes who are said to be well-versed in martial arts and magic. Naruto mused to himself as he picked up the figurine of the priestess herself. So she is not directly related to the church, Luca questioned, finding it a bit odd that a foreigner would align herself with the church and join the alliance. No, story goes that Celestine herself approached her and invited her to join the alliance to fend off Legion incursions. Enemy of my enemy and all that, he replied before shifting his focus onto the next fortress. The fourth fortress is manned by a mercenary named Maya who was nominated as a princess knight by Celestine herself. She has about 1,000 of her own mercenaries under her command, plus another 1,500 church soldiers. Her mercs are strong but undisciplined, so she'll likely be the wild card here. After I killed Vult and turned him into a drone, I scanned his memories. Seems that she had some measure of history with him. He mused, his words earning a look of disgust from his retainer. Please don't tell me she was in relations with him. I don't see how anyone could fall for a thug and misogynist like that Vult guy, Luca grumbled, but her disgust quickly changed to some sadistic amusement since Vult's animated corpse was now being used to pick up animal excrements. No, he saved her life when she first started out. I guess she fell under what is known as the halo effect. Her master responded thoughtfully, making his retainer raise an eyebrow as she parroted in confusion the halo effect. It is a form of thinking, a mental bias, where our perception of a person is positively influenced. For example, in Maya's case, after she was rescued by Vult, she somehow got it in her head that he was a good person, when we both know that is not the case. As a matter of fact, I have seen the halo effect before, he explained, and then fell silent as he left the sentence hanging. Before Queen Olga adopted you, his retainer asked, earning a slow nod from her master who now had a bitter look on his face. He then shrugged his shoulders, seemingly shaking off his soured mood, and then turned his attention to the next fortress, the fifth one. The fifth fortress is controlled by Ruru, the halfling. She has about 4,000 battle-ready halfling soldiers under her banner and another 2,000 church soldiers. This fortress is built into the side of a mountain, so it'll have strong defensive capabilities as well. On the plus side, Ruru is often known to act recklessly and is short-tempered. We can use that to our advantage. He mused aloud and then focused his attention to the final two fortresses, which were practically a stone's throw away from each other. The sixth and seventh fortresses are controlled by both Claudia and Celestine respectively, though Claudia maintains control of all military matters. The Levantine family has about 2,000 of their own soldiers under their command, with Claudia herself and her father-in-law Graves at the head. They'll go to the 7th fortress and garrison there alongside 7,000 church soldiers. They'll likely dig in, bolster their defenses, make us fight for every square inch of the White Citadel. We take and control all of the fortresses, this war will be over. Naruto finished as he leaned back in his seat with a slightly weary sigh. If we launch an assault on the second fortress, then they could launch an attack to flank our army. Luca mused as she pointed at their current target. They could, but it'd be a long march and it'd take time for their armies to group together. I'm banking that they'll abandon the mercs of the second fortress as sacrificial pawns, probably send false promises of reinforcements and leave them to die to give themselves time. Naruto responded dryly, obviously disapproving of the callous sacrifice of other people's lives. I doubt the princesses would approve of that. The black-haired girl muttered, to which her master solemnly replied, indeed, but who says that they're the ones in charge? Naruto slowly shook his head and then spoke, nah. Those in power hate it when the status quo is changed or disrupted. It makes them feel threatened. The leaders of the church, whomever they are, will do anything to maintain their power, even if it means sacrificing the fortresses and whoever lives there. Which is why we're going to extend a chance for our foes to surrender at every given opportunity. We are not soulless monsters, in spite of whatever the church may have to say about us. In response, Luca let out a loud HMPH and stated, irrelevant, I do not care what the dirty humans have to say about us, they can all die for all I care, but if it is your will, I shall obey and agree with your policies. Still, we do have one advantage, the dumb little humans don't yet know the true size of the Legion horde. She spoke the last part with some sadistic glee. She then added as an afterthought, wait, what's stopping the church from seeking outside help from foreign nations? Aside from plain old stubborn pride, the Church of the Goddess isn't very popular outside of EOS. Apparently many non-human dignitaries and visitors have a tendency of disappearing when visiting Hos, most especially when they come to the White Citadel. Naturally, bandits and brigands are blamed for the disappearances, which is a convenient but plausible reason. He answered with a small sigh, making his retainer purse her lips. Since there's no evidence, the church can easily evade any accusations, but non-human foreigners must still be wary of them and are generally distrustful of them. Luca mused aloud while running a hand through her raven-colored locks. Her master nodded and then commanded her indeed. Celestine tries to help mediate and keep the peace, but she is just one woman in a corrupt world that will eventually swallow her up too. Now then, draw me a warm bath, Luca, and fetch my soaps. I want to be clean and presentable for the tonight. At his command, stars filled the young half-elf's eyes since bathing her master was one of her favorite activities and duties since she got to touch and caress her master all over his weltoned and powerful body. Right away, Naruto-sama, the young elf, shouted and then vanished in a blur of motion, very eager to assist her master with his bath. This day just kept on getting better and better for her that reminded her perhaps she should ask her master for a dance at the O. She couldn't wait to be flaunted and showed off like a prized trophy in front of all those disgusting humans who would look on in jealousy of her master and realize just how truly inferior they were in comparison. The day wasn't over yet, and there was still time for it to continue to get even better. Claudia stood guard over her friend Celestine. The high elf was currently resting in her soft and plush bed, sleeping soundly as the female bishop Eleonora silently observed and dabbed the goddess' forehead with a wet towel to help cool her down. Thankfully, Celestine had gotten past the worst of it, but was still greatly weakened by her ordeal. The invincible Valkyrie dare not leave her side lest an assassin attempt to murder her again. The question now was, how was she poisoned? The most likely explanation is that perhaps her food was tainted. So Claudia took measures to ensure that every scrap of food or drop of liquid meant for the elven goddess was to be tested for poison before it was brought before her. If anyone dared to take another chance to end her life, they would be ready for the assassin. Standing next to the faithful bodyguard was her father-in-law, who was pointing towards a map as she listened to his words. Therefore, I shall send a more mobile force to swiftly march to the second fortress and reinforce the mercs there. Around 1,000 men will be sent to garrison there and hold the stronghold until an additional force of 3,000 arrives to flank the enemy army. We will trap them between the two forces and take down their leader. Her father-in-law, Graves, spoke sternly, his words making the brunette woman nod in agreement. Yes, that sounds like a sound strategy. Even if we don't get the leader, we may be able to halt their momentum. The guardian stated, with the aged knight smirking proudly. I shall see to the arrangements. You stay here and guard Celestine-sama. Graves spoke, earning a salute from his daughter-in-law. He was right. Her place was next to her charge and her duty was to protect her from harm. She had no reason for concern since her father-in-law was a seasoned and experienced warrior and his strategy was sound. Graves quietly departed, leaving the three women alone. Those Legion bastards, how dare they harm Celestine-sama? Claudia grumbled under her breath, still seething that someone had attempted to murder one of the kindest and most pure people in all of Eos. Was there anything that damned Alga wouldn't do to achieve victory? She could almost swear that she could hear that witch cackling in sadistic pleasure. She then rubbed her temples with a deep sigh after that disastrous last meeting. Hagua and Maya both returned to their respective fortresses to secure them in case the enemy somehow bypassed or conquered the second fortress. It was very fortunate that the halflings of the fifth fortress knew how to run things even without Ruru's presence. Not surprising given that girl's wild and excitable nature. Her musing was cut short as she heard a commotion down in the cathedral. She wasn't sure what, but it sounded like there was some kind of argument. Some sort of threat. Drawing her sword, Claudia rushed down the stairs and into the cathedral and found a small group of bishops were arguing with some commoners. Whereas Celestine-sama, we wish to speak with her immediately, one of the commoners pleaded rather desperately. I am sorry, but we were just told that Celestine-sama is not seeing visitors right now. One of the bishops replied helplessly. His words did not appease the petitioners at all as they began shouting in dismay, still demanding to see the goddess herself. Enough, Claudia shouted, her voice booming across the cathedral, silencing everyone inside as she made her way down the steps and approached the gathered crowd. What is the meaning of this? Why do you need to see the goddess so badly? She asked with a stern expression. The commoners glanced at one another and were about to speak, but then they looked up at the top of the stairs that the Valkyrie had just descended from. She followed their gazes to the top of the steps and to her shock, saw Celestine herself, breathing heavily as she looked down at the people. Her face pale and her body seemed ready to collapse at any moment. Celestine-sama, please stop. You shouldn't be out of bed. You need rest, Eleonora pleaded from behind the high elf, trying to get her to go back to bed and recover fully from the poison. No, the people, they need me. I cannot just rest and let their sorrows go unanswered. Celestine spoke weakly, her body covered in a sheen of sweat as she limped her way down the stairs. Each step down seemed to be a tremendous effort for her. There even seemed to be a few times where she was about to trip but regained her balance. Celestine-sama, go back to bed. I will handle this. Just go rest, Claudia also pleaded, but was ignored by the goddess. The commoners and townsfolk began whispering amongst themselves, clearly worried for the high elf's health. She looks sick. Is she okay? I didn't know elves could get sick. Look at her. She clearly needs bed rest. These were some of the things that could be clearly heard as the various petitioners whispered amongst each other. Finally, Celestine seemed unable to continue as she set herself down and sat on the middle step, clearly exhausted from making it this far. "Do not worry over me. I am just feeling a little under the weather. Please tell me what ails you. How can I help? What has caused you such distress?" she asked in a kind voice. In spite of her condition, she still cared far more than others than for herself and forced herself out of bed to help those in need. Her kindness moved the people to tears as they began crying and snotting all over the place. One villager, an older man who more or less held it together despite the building tears, managed to speak up. "Countless apologies for disturbing your rest when you are sick, Celestine-sama, but we need your help every month or so. Church soldiers come and ask people for donations to help fund the war effort. Normally, we give our coin gladly to support our troops so they may better fight the Legion. Lately, however, more and more soldiers have been coming and demanding more coin. Earlier today, many of us here refused because we needed to buy seed for harvest or food for our families, so the soldiers beat us up and took our money by force." At this revelation, Eleonora, Claudia, and Celestine all had shocked expressions. Soldiers of the church robbing and assaulting people, that was truly awful and unforgivable. The female bishop adopted a thinking pose and then spoke up. "Was there not an incident some time ago where some con men were posing as members of the clergy who tricked people into giving donations as well?" These words made everyone mutter in agreement as the memory of that incident came flooding back to them. "Oh, that's right, I remember that happening." The church were extremely embarrassed about it too. Someone must be trying to start something similar again. A random villager spoke up with the others muttering in agreement since that made sense. "So this time thieves are posing as soldiers. Hey, I promise you all, this matter will be thoroughly investigated. I must ask you all to please give as many details on these impostors as possible so that we may identify them and clap them in irons." Claudia spoke in a professional tone, earning nods of agreement from the various villagers and commoners who were eager to lend their assistance and cooperation. Celestine then added, "We shall find these criminals and bring them to justice. For now, though, the church will compensate you for your lost coin. Bishop Eleonora, please make the arrangements." Upon her order, the female bishop slowly nodded with a kind smile. "I shall. However, first I must escort you back to bed." "Immediately. You have already pushed yourself too much," she stated, and then helped the goddess to her feet, assisting her back up the stairs to her private chambers. The high elf wanted to protest at first, but she decided that perhaps some rest would be good for now. Even at this moment she feared that she could faint dead away. While her heart was willing, her body couldn't obey her wishes at this time. Now that she thought about it, this may be an opportunity to meditate in the privacy of her chambers and see if she could summon a vision of Olga or her general. Any information that could help end the threat of the Legion would be of tremendous value. However, on the other hand, between the assassination attempt and these robberies, perhaps just this once, she should focus her attention closer to home. Meanwhile, First Fortress. "I hate this," Alicia muttered as she sipped some punch, a deep scowl on her face as the room she was standing in was filled with various aristocrats and nobles. The sounds of soft and mellow music played as the guests seemed to comfortably chat away, ignoring the presence of the demonic guards that watched everything and everyone. Unlike the commoners or servants that seemed fearful of what may happen next, the nobility didn't seem fearful at all. She caught faint snippets of conversations that seemed to be centered around their queen. They all knew this party was just an excuse to gather them all in one place so that the Dark Queen may gain oaths of fealty from them, and they seemed all too eager to jump on the bandwagon out of convenience. So long as their wealth and status remained, they didn't seem to care who was in charge. "You always did hate parties." Prim spoke with a small smile, her face obscured by her new butterfly mask. Her words made her blonde cousin scoff and adjust her wolf mask. It was true. She always hated and parties. It was always the same thing. While she didn't mind the food or occasional dance, she always viewed such events as pointless displays of status or wealth amongst nobles. She would much rather be leading armies into battle against the Legion than suffer any pompous nobles giving false congratulations to one another. "I think I might attempt to escape and hang myself from the gallows," Alicia muttered in despair, wishing she was almost anywhere but here. "Just endure it for a little while. I'll be right here with you." Prim spoke comfortingly, the gentle princess soothingly tracing a hand on her cousin's forearm. The blonde knight gave a stiff nod in response. For Prim's sake, she would endure virtually any torture. "Princess Prim, it has been too long," spoke a voice that bordered between masculine and feminine, causing the two cousins to turn and see a young noble approach them. While his face was obscured from a mask, his voice was definitely familiar to them. Alicia remembered him as one of countless suitors that tried to gain her cousin's hand. Oh, what was his name again? There are so many. Albert something, or was it Lambert? She decided to go with Albert for now. Albert chuckled as he took the pinkette by the hand and added, his fingers rubbing the back of her hand as he spoke, "It is so marvelous to see you again, princess. I would recognize your beauty anywhere, even if your face is hidden behind a mask." The blonde knight rolled her eyes as she thought to herself, "Yeah, right. All you recognized was that distinctive pink hair. Wait, is he still holding her hand?" She thought the last part upon noticing that the suitor had yet to release her cousin from his grip. "Oh, yes, of course, kind sir. Thank you," the Pinkette replied shyly, trying to pull her hand away from the masked noble. Albert gave a broad grin in an attempt to appear suave or charming as he spoke. "You must be beside yourself right now, being a prisoner to a ruffian with absolutely no sense of honor, no less. Kidnapping you when you came under a white flag, how despicable." His tone sounded over the top, and it sounded as if he were saying things he believed that he wanted the Pinkette to hear. The two cousins were quite familiar with this. This would always happen whenever someone wanted to court the gentle and kind princess. That's not exactly what happened. You see, Prim tried to explain that she technically broke the truce by challenging Naruto to a duel, but she was cut off by the masked suitor. "Have no fear, my dear princess. If that monster dares try to claim you for his bed, I shall rush to your defense, rapier in hand," Albert promised with a laugh that was perhaps a bit too loud as some party-goers began looking in their direction. Alicia sneered since the man was clearly posturing and trying to make himself sound and look more impressive than he was in an attempt to charm Prim or other nobles. She had finally had enough and was about to drown him in the nearest punch bowl, but someone else acted first. A strong hand appeared on the suitor's wrist and gripped it tight. The sounds of bones cracking could be heard as a figure wearing an ornate silver and black Hanya mask stared at the masked noble. "Pardon the intrusion, but Primheim promised me a dance, and I intend to collect. Unless you wish to come to her defense, a rapier in hand," was it? Naruto asked in a chilling voice, his eyes cold and detached, lacking any sort of warmth or humanity as Albert let out a silent scream of terror and quickly shook his head in denial, obviously not going to back up his boasts. The Forge Master released him and then turned towards the Pinkette with a hand extended to her. "Primheim, may I have this dance?" he asked her politely, his eyes now filled with kindness and care. The pink-haired princess smiled sweetly and gave a curtsy, accepting his hand as he gently guided her to the dance floor, leaving behind a former suitor to nurse his wrist and Alicia to watch from the sidelines as she glared at the Hanya, almost daring him to try something with her cousin. "You seemed like you were in need of a rescue there. Apologies for the fib," he whispered to the gentle princess, who simply shook her head with a smile. "The intervention is appreciated." Had it continued, "I think Alicia would have done much worse," she replied with a soft giggle. A waltz began playing in the background as they took their positions on the dance floor, and then began dancing their way across the room. Naruto held her hand in his own and placed his other hand on the small of her back as they stepped across the dance floor. "You know, I think this is the first time I have ever danced at a formal event," he admitted with a soft chuckle. His words confused her for a moment, until she giggled a bit upon realizing that no parties had ever been held at the Black Citadel since only monsters had lived in the Dark Queen's lands. Creatures who can only think of raping women would definitely not be pleasant party guests. "You could have fooled me. You seem like a natural dancer," she replied sweetly, noting that they seemed to almost be gliding across the dance floor with ease, as if they had danced together hundreds of times before. It felt almost unnatural, but certainly enjoyable. Many dances she had during parties and events were often awkward. Sometimes it involved stale conversation or bad dancing from her partner. Naruto, though she felt quite comfortable. Even with his signature Hanya mask on, she could tell he was smiling as he replied to her, "I learned to dance thanks to my mother and Khloe." Elves love to dance. To many elves, high or dark, dancing is a form of expression and in some cases a form of courtship. Some forms of dance, especially a few created by the Dark Elves, are extremely intimate. He spoke at the end in a slightly husky voice, pulling the princess a little closer to his body. He then whispered to her a description of one form of a courting dance created by the Dark Elves, causing Prim to blush deeply beneath her mask as she whispered to herself, "Gee, goodness gracious. That seems quite lewd." The whiskered teen snickered a bit, taking notice that Alicia was glaring at him from the sidelines. Apparently she isn't liking how he is holding her cousin so close to him. "Naruto-san, can I ask you a question?" she asked him politely, to which he answered back, "Ask me anything you like, Primheim. Why did you take the poison first? We are enemies, and yet, you basically spared my life. It doesn't make much sense to me," she asked him, earning a slow off from the Forge Master. He seemed to briefly consider how to answer her, but then she sensed another smile beneath his mask once he found the words he wanted to convey. "For one thing, I had no reason or wish to see you dead. For another, I admired your courage and bravery to stand up to me and attempt to rescue your cousin. As I previously mentioned, I wanted to see how far you would take it, and you didn't disappoint. Also, I'd hate to see the life of a kind, brave and beautiful young woman like you be snuffed out." He answered her, the sincerity of his words making her eyes widened. Many times people had given her compliments or said nice things in the hopes of earning her favor, but Naruto wasn't like that. He means what he says and says what he means. There is no deception or bravado in his voice, he actually means it. "Also, I kind of have a weakness for the ladies," the blonde teen added in a joking tone, earning a giggle and a playful slap from the princess. She wasn't sure if that was a serious statement or not, but she still found it amusing. The song slowly came to an end, and Prim found herself glancing over the Uzumaki's shoulder, noting the presence of numerous waiting nobles who were eyeing her hungrily. no doubt waiting for their moment to pounce on her and ask for a dance. Easily sensing the cause of her distress, the blonde spun her around so that he was now facing the nobles, noting their predatory gazes. Deciding to have a little fun and to give the princess an out, he asked her in a too loud voice, "Prim, remember what you said to me after I claimed you as my prisoner?" She tilted her head in confusion as she replied, "Could you remind me, please? Also, why are you speaking so loudly?" As soon as her questions left her lips, she sensed a sudden shift in the mood within the room. Her dance partner spun her around once more so that she could see the nobles that had been eyeing her and saw that their hungry gazes were replaced by confused ones. "Your exact words were as follows: 'You may do with me as you wish.'" He spoke loudly, his words immediately making her remember. Yes, she did say those exact words after her defeat. Before she could react, the Uzumaki lifted up his mask and placed his lips against hers. She let out a confused and surprised yelp that was muffled by the blonde's mouth and stiffened up, but soon she melted into the and embraced him as she returned the gesture with a soft. A feeling of intoxication overcame her as she felt warmth flood her body. For a brief moment she felt strong, powerful, like she could crush mountains with her bare hands. Then, the Uzumaki broke off and pulled his mask back down, completely obscuring his face once again as he gave her a wink and gestured behind him. She glanced over his shoulder once again and saw the nobles who had been hungrily eyeing her now seemed to be in the throes of despair and disappointment. In their minds, the prized princess that they had long coveted had been claimed by the Legion General as his personal trophy. "Sorry about that, but at least now they'll leave you alone," Naruto whispered to her, but she waved off his apology dismissively. "Think nothing of it, Naruto-san. I kind of enjoyed that," she whispered back with a blush that was partially obscured by her pink butterfly mask. At least for now she could perhaps enjoy a party without being bothered by admirers or suitors. Wait, was she forgetting about someone? An angry growl came from behind the Uzumaki as a hand gripped his shoulder tightly with enough force that made him wince, even with his unusually high pain tolerance. He slowly turned towards the aggressor and found Alicia staring daggers at him. In the background, the Uzumaki's demonic soldiers were about to step in, but he put a stop to them with a wave of his hand. "Princess Alicia, would you care to dance?" he asked calmly. Alicia sneered at him and seemed to be weighing her options on how to approach the situation. She seemed to conclude that discretion was the better part of valor in this instance, despite her instincts telling her to jam her fist down the Forge Master's throat, except he had a demon army and a lot of potential hostages. If she messed up, there would be a bath. "Fine," she replied gruffly and held out a hand for her fellow blonde to take as he placed his free hand to the small of her back. Sensing the hostility in the air, Prim excused herself and retreated to the nearest table that was currently bearing sweets and desserts as a new song began to play, prompting both Alicia and Naruto to begin dancing across the floor, ignoring everyone around them from casual observers to fellow dancers. The female knight's attention was laser-focused on one person and one person alone, Naruto himself. "You're not angry about that, are you? If you want one, I'd be happy to oblige you. I can't turn down a request from a lovely woman, especially such a fierce-looking one such as yourself." He spoke to her charmingly, though inwardly he was sweating bullets. There were only three things that Naruto truly feared in his life: being alone again, failing his loved ones, and divine feminine fury. Despite his flirting, she understandably didn't seem amused in the slightest. "Touch my cousin again, and I swear that I'll kill you. Chivalry and honor be damned," she whispered harshly, wishing that she had a sword in her hand so that she may jam it either in his heart or his loins, maybe both, just for thoroughness. "That doesn't sound like something a knight should say. I assure you, though, my intentions were noble. I said and did those things so that her suitors would leave her alone, at least for the evening." It was a kind of a spur-of-the-moment type situation. He spoke honestly, his words seemingly placating the blonde princess, her anger slowly melting as she saw her cousin happily munching on some cake, and for once she wasn't being accosted by anyone nor needed her protection. "Fine, I suppose I'll let it slide, just this once. Though if you ever do that again, I promise that I'll make you regret it." She spoke bitterly as she glared at her fellow blonde with a critical eye, her wolf mask making her look all the more fearsome. "Very well then, I understand completely. Though let it be said, should the day ever come that I take advantage of a woman against her will, I pray that I am appropriately punished for it." The whiskered teen spoke, making a cross-my-heart gesture across his, satisfying the princess knight. "You know, I don't usually dance at these sorts of events." Alicia spoke out of nowhere, briefly surprising herself at how casually she let that slip. She wasn't under some kind of spell, was she? No, she was certain that she was not. She had undergone extensive mental training to guard herself against mental attacks and trickery employed by some mages. Yet she felt nothing influencing her mind. Now that she thought about it, her captor was a good dancer. "No offense meant, but you don't seem like the type of person to attend or parties. You seem more like a woman of action. I'm guessing you only attend such events out of either obligation or to help protect your cousin." The whiskered teen spoke, earning a nod from the blonde princess. He was right, of course, there was no denying it. It always feels like a waste of time and resources attending these types of parties, especially when you have the Legion knocking on your doors almost every day. Correction, had. She added the last part since the Legion had now taken her fortress, and she was now a prisoner in her own home. She would never be able to live this down. "That reminds me, during our duel, I noticed that your fighting style strongly relies on speed. Your swordsmanship is superb and your technique was utterly flawless in my opinion, but it seems to me that your main weakness is your lack of stamina. The longer a fight drags on, the worse off you are. You must be used to defeating your opponents with ease. Makes me wonder, is it because you are so strong or your opponents are so weak, or is it both? He questioned gently, making the princess sigh. You're not wrong. I trained hard, every day, practicing and honing my skills with the blade until I was eventually nominated as the Princess Knight of the First Fortress. Celestine Sama herself congratulated my swordsmanship and bade me to use my skills to protect others. Unfortunately, whenever I sparred with my troops, I would always beat them with ease, and they would always look up at me in jealousy. Not to boast, but I sometimes think I make them feel inadequate or envious because of my skills. Wait, why am I telling you all of this? What manner of trickery is this? She demanded at the end, now realizing she had been carrying on for a while and said far more than she intended. The Uzumaki simply shrugged his shoulders as they continued dancing without missing a beat as he replied, this isn't the first time this has happened. People tend to get really chatty around me for some reason. I honest to goodness don't know why. My mother thinks it is because I have some sort of aura of charisma about me that makes most people feel comfortable around me, though that is a subject of some debate. You don't say. Alicia deadpanned, not believing him in the slightest, though she supposed that he didn't really have a reason to lie about that. It was definitely weird though. He chuckled in a slightly awkward manner and shifted the subject by asking, if you're ever interested, would you care to train with me? She was surprised by his question and almost tripped over her own feet, but managed to regain her balance at the last second and stared at him wide-eyed. You want to? You want me to train with you? Why? She asked him, stammering with her words a bit as the Uzumaki nodded at her question. Of course, I can always use a new training partner to help practice with. You don't have to if you don't want to, he answered, emphasizing that she had a choice of whether she wanted to join him or not. She pursed her lips, almost considering his invitation before she asked him, Naruto, what do you see me and Prim as? Are we meant to be your slaves, trophies, playthings? What are we to you? Without any hesitation, the Forge Master replied to her, I was hoping that we could be friends. At his answer, the world seemed to slow down around Alicia as she could only stare into his deep blue eyes, not a hint of deception in them. Friends, seriously, that was all? No way, knowing way. Not possible. Simply not possible. There was just no way. No one could possibly be this selfless and pure-hearted, least of all a member of the Legion, and yet he always acted with honor and integrity. Offers still open if you're interested. No pressure, he offered once again as the music came to a close. He then lifted up his mask and at his fellow blonde on the hand, as if to say thank you for the dance. She mumbled something incoherently and then separated from him, her eyes wide as she seemed to wander off aimlessly, as if she were in a daze. Wow, you're really slaying them tonight, aren't you? Naruto-sama spoke a familiar voice next to the Uzumaki. He chuckled a bit as he looked down at the form of his loyal retainer, Luca. The young half-elf grinning cheekily at him while wearing a black dress, complete with a panther mask. You're so charming that you don't even try, she added with a giggle, earning a small shrug from her master. It's a gift, one I don't have full control over. You should know, our first days together you gave increasingly graphic threats about how you would castrate me, and within the week you were ready and willing to serve me, hand and foot. He quipped, earning some melodious laughter from his retainer. Guilty. What can I say though? You're just a naturally good person. Not really sure how to explain it, plus you were so kind and patient with me, she muttered nostalgically, making her master grin a bit. If you say so, then I won't refute it. At any rate, does my beautiful retainer wish to dance with her master? He asked while extending his hand to her, making his servant giggle as she accepted his hand. For you I'd dance the night away and then rock your world in the bedroom. She spoke with a cheeky smile, a blush appearing on her face which was hidden beneath her mask. Her master gave a soft laugh as the two assumed their positions and began to dance as the next song played. Luca's ears perked up as she heard the other humans whispering to each other. Many were shocked to learn that another dark elf existed. Some were whispering in envy that they didn't own her, and others were bristling with envy at the sight of the Legion General dancing not only with the fair princesses but an elf maiden as well. Spirits, she wanted to laugh at those stupid humans. What they wanted, they couldn't have, and her master had earned everything that was his. It wasn't just handed off to him because he was the son of some big-shot noble. Her beloved master worked hard, every day, to get to his current level. There was no possible way these humans could compare. Thinking about something good, he asked as he noticed the starry looks he was getting from his retainer. Just thinking about how magnificent you are, she replied honestly, which made the Uzumaki shake his head with a sly smile. Careful, you keep singing my praises and I'll probably get a swollen ego. He spoke in a half-joking tone, making the black-haired half-elf snicker a bit. I'd prefer it if something else of yours swelled up, she quipped, glancing down at his groin. She then continued, Naruto-sama, you have yet to do anything more to me than or cuddle with me. Why have you not taken me as your lover? Ouch. Seems like someone was getting impatient. Not that he could necessarily blame her given her strong feelings and dedication to him. Largely because I have been busy juggling around multiple duties. I promise you though, you'll get your turn. I cannot say when exactly, but you will. He responded gently, making the young half-elf puff out her cheeks a bit. She then gave him a saucy grin and spoke in a teasing tone, Fine, I'll wait a bit longer. Though if you make me wait too long, I'll get really lonely and won't be able to concentrate on my duties. Then you'll have to punish me, really hard." She whispered out the last part in a sultry tone. Her master simply nodded in understanding and wiggled his eyebrows, all the while making a mental note to not underestimate the thirstiness of elf girls. The dance suddenly came to an abrupt end as a loud trumpeting came from near the currently empty throne that was overlooking the room. Luca was a bit miffed that her moment with her master had come to a halt, but grinned since she knew what was going to come next. Standing next to the throne was Khloe, wearing ceremonial armor and wearing a mask that resembled a hawk. Announcing Her Majesty, Queen Olga Discordia, the blonde half-elf announced, which caused a spotlight to focus on the queen herself, who slowly and gracefully descended down a flight of stairs. The queen wore a dark purple dress while wearing an owl mask, her signature scepter in hand as she approached the throne. Khloe gently took her mistress' hand and assisted her down the final set of steps and escorted her to the throne. Once Alga was seated, she smiled and spoke, "Greetings to you, one and all. Welcome to my kingdom, the Garen Kingdom and Suntob Empire. For those who wish to serve and be part of this new empire, come and pledge fealty to me. Refuse and there will be certain consequences." Khloe cleared her throat and unfurled a scroll as she called out, "When your name is called, you shall approach the queen and pledge yourself to her and her empire." She paused to clear her throat once again and called out the name of a prominent noble. The nobleman let out a nervous squeak and quickly approached, almost throwing himself at the Dark Queen's feet as he dropped to his hands and knees. It didn't take long at all for her to extract the necessary pledge from him. Once he had uttered his oath, the queen shooed him away with a wave of her hand. One by one, the nobles and aristocrats were called up. Some were more reluctant than others to swear oaths of fealty to the Dark Queen, but in the end, they obeyed since they feared her potential wrath and the waiting demon soldiers who watched their every move. In the background, Alicia watched this event unfold and let out a disgusted scoff upon seeing a few who willingly pledged themselves to Olga, promising her support and information, and expressed their hopes that they would have prestigious positions in her burgeoning empire. Damn sellouts. Was there no honor and loyalty among them? She was utterly disgusted at how quick some of the nobility were to jump ship. And for what more? Gold, status, prestige, power. No doubt if Olga was on the losing end of this war, these same nobles would immediately rejoin the alliance. Fickle bastards. However, she and Prim couldn't help but notice that the queen had yet to make any official promises to these very nobles. The minutes ticked by slowly as more names were called up. There didn't seem to be any particular rhyme, reason, or organization to the list as Khloe kept calling out seemingly random names, and those who hadn't yet been called were starting to sweat and feel nervous, noticing the queen's retainer seemed to be reaching the bottom of her list. At last, Khloe discarded the list of names, revealing that she had finished, leaving at least half of the present nobles unnamed and not pledged to the queen. For a brief moment, everyone wondered if the blonde half-elf would retrieve a second list, but she did not make any further movements, until the queen herself began to chuckle and waved a finger to her retainer, prompting Khloe to reach behind her queen's throne and pull out an ornate box. The queen laughed again, her voice silky smooth and melodious, but with it came a chill wind that sent shivers to everyone across the room as she smiled wickedly. "I am sure you are wondering why only half of the nobles present were named and invited to pledge themselves to me. The other half have no place in my kingdom or my empire," Olga stated bluntly, and snapped her fingers, prompting Khloe to open the box and dump the contents of the floor. A cascade of keys fell from the box and began clattering down on the steps as everyone watched in confusion. Keys of brass, keys of silver, keys of iron, keys of gold, all of different shapes and sizes fell down to the ground. Both of the princesses looked towards the Hanya, silently asking him what the meaning of this bizarre turn of events was. As if sensing their gazes, he turned towards them ever so slightly and raised a lone finger to his mouth to make a shushing gesture. A series of shocked gasps came from the unnamed nobles, seemingly recognizing the keys. "Thought it's my..." A random unnamed noble sputtered, and then quickly caught himself and fell silent, as if he were afraid that he almost let something slip, but it was too late. "Recognize them, they should be more than recognizable to their owners," Olga stated, and then clapped her hands twice. Her son acknowledged the signal and snapped his fingers. On his command, a pair of demons opened the main entrance to the room, allowing a crowd of people to enter. Both Prim and Alicia watched in shock as they saw a crowd of slaves enter the room, their chains and shackles rattling with every movement, carrying shovels, pickaxes, knives, and various other tools and weapons, their eyes ablaze with fury as they glared at the nobles who didn't receive the chance to swear themselves to Olga's service. "Remember when I said that Luca was taking care of things for me?" Naruto asked, directing the question to the two princesses, who slowly turned to him, their eyes almost the size of dinner plates, as he continued, "She wasn't just preparing my dancing clothes. I had her do some investigation into the nobles within the fortress so that we may root out any and all slave owners," he added, and gestured towards the slaves themselves, who were glaring at their masters with deadly and fatal intentions. "Slavery, that's illegal," Alicia muttered, a part of her wanting to deny the possibility that slavery was happening beneath her nose. How could she not have seen this? Was she truly so blind? If she had known about this, then she would have cut down these s herself. She grit her teeth, her fists clenching as she felt white-hot fury fill her. She felt anger at the nobles for taking people as slaves, and she felt anger at herself for never sensing that something was amiss within her very own fortress. She wanted desperately to deny that this was reality. She wanted to tell herself that this was all a nightmare, a fevered dream, but the proof was here in front of her. Slaves of varying ages, mostly girls and women, a few small boys and teenagers. A few humans, but most were non-human, all of the non-humans being beastmen as evidenced by the features of various animals. Covered in bruises and cuts, their skin and hair dirty from lack of bathing, their bodies skinny and frail from a lack of food and care. The Dark Queen rested her head atop a loosely closed fist and spoke up. Slavery may have been outlawed by your church, but I assure you, it is very much alive and in practice in Eos. I imagine that those of you who own previously owned slaves likely paid certain tithes to the church so that they may turn a blind eye. Yes, well, those days end now. In my kingdom, slavery is a crime punishable by death. Anyone who owns a slave will be immediately sentenced to death. The now freed slaves turned on their masters, raising their weapons threateningly as they stalked towards the cowering nobles. Kindly escort the dead meat outside where a mess won't be made, the Uzumaki ordered, prompting his demonic soldiers to begin forcing the soon-to-be dead nobles outside, where their former slaves may freely take their pound of flesh for all the suffering they endured. Leniency will be shown to the spouses and the children of these traitors, of course. I am not without mercy. We are not monsters, the Dark Queen added, since there was no need to spill the of those who were not involved with the slaves. The testimonies of the slaves themselves revealed who was innocent and guilty after all. Once they were all gone, the doors slammed shut behind them with a resounding thud. The once comfortable atmosphere of the room now filled with cold dread as everyone came to the same conclusion: Olga Discordia was not a woman to be crossed, for any reason. If that was not evident before her invasion, it certainly was now. No, please, for the lives of your subjects, Alicia, Prim, Naruto asked the princesses, and in response they slowly shook their heads negatively. In spite of Alicia's code of chivalry and honor and Prim's kind and gentle nature, neither of them could or would defend slavers. Anyone who would enslave the life of another so callously was not worthy of life. Didn't think so, Naruto muttered, unsurprised by this. He then smirked beneath his mask and added just one more thing on the agenda. He then pointed up towards the ceiling, causing all eyes to look upwards and see the form of a bound and gagged Beardsley who was being hanged upside down with chains wrapped tight around his ankles. His face red from the rushing to his head as he wiggled and sobbed and made muffled noises that one could assume was him begging for his life. Alicia is the wounded party of your former Prime Minister's betrayal. Would you care to take point on this part? The Hanya asked her in a professional tone. Needless to say, despite her initial shock from just moments ago, she did not hesitate to accept her fellow blonde's invitation as she marched forward and joined him at his side as Luca stepped out of the way for her, a broad grin on the small half-elf's face. He extended his hands to the Princess Knight and conjured a scroll and another small box. The latter she recognized as something belonging to Beardsley since it bore his insignia. She accepted the items and then unfurled the scroll first to read its contents, and found it to be a list of charges. She glanced towards the Uzumaki, who simply gave her a nod, prompting her to clear her throat. After collecting herself, the Princess Knight began to speak. Former Prime Minister Beardsley is hereby charged with high treason, embezzlement, misuse of funds and goods, and attempting to take a slave. More specifically me. She spat out the last part in disgust before continuing. Do you deny these charges? From above, the former minister vigorously nodded his head, causing his body to swing back and forth in the air. This course of action made the blonde knight scoff, finding it ridiculous how even now he denies his traitorous actions. A worm and a coward till the end then, not that it matters. The end result would be the same. She then opened the box and found various don'ts which revealed the purchases he had made with the embezzled money, a shocking amount being used to hire prostitutes. Young blonde ones, no doubt, so he may play out his sick fantasies that involve her. There were some other papers inside, but all she could focus on was the one page that described the prostitutes he had hired. She felt bile rise up in her throat and her face flushed red in anger as she slammed the box shut. After carefully reviewing the evidence, I find you guilty of all charges, Beardsley. I hereby sentence you to be boiled in oil until you are dead, Alicia announced loudly, making the former minister give a muffled scream of terror. Being boiled alive was potentially one of the worst ways to be executed. He would much rather be hanged or beheaded than be boiled alive. Someone get a very big pot. We are gonna have an execution tomorrow, Naruto called out, his eyes scanning over the remaining nobles who had pledged themselves to his mother. If there was ever any thoughts in their heads of rebellion or skirting around the law, they had been instantly crushed. They realized their options were to either respect the law of their new queen or be swept aside. There was no middle ground or leniency. In Naruto's opinion, laws were meaningless if they couldn't or wouldn't be enforced. People often took advantage of various loopholes or escaped the consequences through legal trickery, wordplay, or even outright bribery and intimidation. A common occurrence in his homelands, it happened throughout the entire world, no question, but in the shinobi nations it seemed especially true. With this act done, they had officially begun laying the foundation of their future empire. Meanwhile, the White Citadel, Celestine's chambers. No, this can't be happening. Why, I just don't understand. The elven goddess muttered to herself, restlessly pacing about in her chambers. After being escorted back to her room, she took the opportunity to rest her body, and to her delight, she recovered rather quickly. A benefit of being a high elf, she supposed, being gifted with an excellent constitution. However, there was another matter troubling her. She was about to send a summons for her personal guard Claudia, but this became unnecessary as the invincible Valkyrie appeared in her chambers. The High Elf was grateful to see her guard. She now desperately needed someone to confide in. Before she could open her mouth, Claudia began to speak first as she gave her report. Celestine-sama, I am pleased to report that all of the robbed civilians have been compensated and returned home. I personally interviewed them and they all said the same thing, that the church soldiers that robbed them kept their visors down, undoubtedly to conceal their identities except one. One farmer was lucky enough to see one of the criminals lift his visor up for a moment and saw a distinguishing crescent-shaped scar near his right eye. If we can find this criminal, then he can give us information on his cohorts. The goddess bodyguard reported, leaving the High Elf unable to get a word in edgewise until she was finished. Now that she finally had a chance to speak, Celestine quickly spoke in an almost panicked tone. That's good to hear, but I am afraid that I have discovered something terrible. Sensing the fear in her charge's tone, the brown-haired guardian's protective instincts quickly kicked in. Well, what is it? Has someone threatened you, tried to hurt you? What happened? The Valkyrie demanded. After a long silence, Celestine finally replied, I can no longer perceive any visions. At this news, Claudia's jaw dropped and the entire world seemed to shatter around her. The goddess, leader, and protector of the Alliance and Eos is no longer able to receive her visions. Then that meant they were now blind to potential disasters, that they could no longer predict the Legion's movements or anything for that matter. Goddess, was all Claudia could say as she hung her head low in despair, coming to a swift conclusion that dark days now lie ahead for Eos. Without Celestine's guiding hand and visions, what were they to do? If word got out about this, there would be a panic. The Alliance would be seen as vulnerable and weaker than ever. It was a severe blow, losing 2 of the 7 princesses to the Legion, and now this. Damn it, all, Claudia screamed out in frustration. There was no way this was a coincidence. Whoever was behind the attempted assassination was undoubtedly behind this. If they could not kill the goddess, then they would blind her. And there was only one magic user who would potentially have the knowledge to perform this feat. Even if she supposedly lost her powers, she still had that damned Forge Master to do her bidding. Olga Discordia, I will end you. The Valkyrie promised as she gripped her sword. No matter what, she would protect Celestine and Eos, and she would see the Dark Queen pay for all her crimes, no matter the cost. Fortunately, troops were undoubtedly on their way to the second fortress to reinforce Leona's mercenary company. For now, all she could do was wait by her charge's side and wait for word from her father-in-law. The next stage of the war would soon begin. Claudia Celestine spoke, uttering the name of her loyal bodyguard, who seemed to be currently trapped in a stupor of shock and rage. The goddess hated seeing her friend like this. Normally her faithful guardian was calm and level-headed, but now it seemed like she was on the verge of having some sort of breakdown. She cupped the brown-haired woman's cheeks in her hands, which seemed to pull the Valkyrie back to reality. The Valkyrie's anger slowly melted away as she muttered, I am sorry, Celestine-sama. I lost myself to my anger. It feels like everything is starting to fall apart. I understand. You are frustrated and angry, but we must not lose ourselves to rage and hatred. We are protectors after all, Celestine replied and gave a gentle and chase atop her loyal bodyguard's forehead, which seemed to help lift the brunette's spirits as she gave a soft smile of gratitude. The goddess then set herself down on the side of her bed, her hands folded across her lap as she spoke in a soft voice, we must break the news of this. We cannot hide that I have lost my ability of clairvoyance. Hearing this, the Valkyrie almost panicked yet again and quickly spoke, no, we must not tell anyone. If we reveal this, the people's faith will be shaken to the core. There could be mass panic, riots, we could lose support amongst the people, it could embolden the Legion to attack us more aggressively. Celestine simply closed her eyes. While she was still afraid that she had lost her powers of foresight, there were far greater concerns at hand. She then spoke in a patient voice, yes, it could shake the people's faith. However, if we hide the truth, then we could lose something more important, their trust. The people trust us, they trust me, to guide them and protect them towards an era of peace. How can I do this if they do not trust me? Claudia frowned as she ran a gloved hand through her hair and then spoke, at the very least, let's not say anything right away. Please, give me some time. I'll find a way to break this curse that Olga and her Forge Master placed upon you. Maybe Kaguya can help. She saved you before from the poison. Maybe she can help restore your foresight as well. You think that the Dark Queen and her general are behind this? Why? The High Elf questioned, earning a confused look from her guardian. Why not them? Who else could or would do this to you? The Valkyrie asked. Just what was Celestine getting at? First, Olga loses her magical abilities, which I saw in my visions. Then I was poisoned and lost my own abilities. Additionally, the people came to us for help so that we may address these robberies. Claudia, something is wrong. Something is very wrong here. Even without my clairvoyance, I can sense it. The goddess spoke as she stared at her lap. Sense what her guardian asked, but instead of very answering, the High Elf only shook her head sadly. Go home tonight, Claudia. Be with your husband. I must meditate on these events. The elf spoke dismissively, which confused her bodyguard. Celestine-sama, Claudia asked, wondering what was going through the goddess' mind. Meditate on what? Her lack of visions, the war, something else. In the morning, I want you to continue investigating these robberies. The people must be protected. They are counting on us to keep them safe. the buxom goddess ordered, earning a slow nod from the Valkyrie. Taking her leave, Claudia decided to head home for the night as her charge had ordered her to do. Perhaps a good night's sleep will bring some clarity. Meanwhile, First Fortress. The Masquerade was back in full swing as music played and the guests seemed to be enjoying themselves once more, almost as if they had magically forgotten the events that happened not so long ago. Perhaps they felt that so long as they weren't in danger, they had nothing to worry about. Naruto smirked as he lifted his mask up to sip some punch and noted that both Alicia and Prim seemed to be distracted. The former still seemed rattled by what had transpired earlier and discovering that slavery was happening within the walls of her fortress, while the latter seemed to be in a dreamy daze while tracing a finger along her lips. He pulled his mask back down into place and made his way towards them with a small swagger. As he approached, he heard the blonde princess speak to her cousin Primchen. "What are you doing?" Naruto's lips were the Pinkette muttered to herself in a distracted manner, making her blonde cousin blink a few times. Was she still thinking about that from earlier? Was he really that good at her? Alicia couldn't help but feel curious, but then had to mentally slap herself, reminding herself that it is unwise to get too comfortable with the enemy. "Evening, ladies. Anything I can do for you? You don't seem like you're enjoying the party right now." Naruto spoke in a concerned manner, swirling the liquid in his glass as he smiled beneath his mask. The Princess Knight frowned a bit as conflicting emotions flooded her. On the one hand, she was grateful to him for rooting out the corruption that had festered in her fortress, but on the other, he was still a threat to Eos and would march on the next fortress at any time. "We're just tired from what has transpired." Alicia spoke hesitantly, having little to no experience in the art of lying due to her code of chivalry. Fortunately, her words weren't necessarily a lie. She couldn't tell whether her fellow blonde believed her or not, but he still spoke in a kind manner. "Is that so? Would you like me to escort you to your rooms, ladies?" "Well, you're saying I can't keep Prim safe?" Alicia snapped out without warning, which made both Prim and Naruto stare at her in surprise. Just where did that come from? If the Hanya was angry or offended, he did not show it as he simply stared at the blonde knight. He laughed off her outburst and replied soothingly, "Of course not. I'm more than certain you could protect her just fine. I was simply offering to escort you lovely ladies to your rooms as a gentleman should. Though, I don't think you're angry at me, are you? I think you're angry at yourself for not realizing that slavery was happening within your very home." "Well, don't be angry. These sorts of people have become quite skilled at hiding such things. Fortunately, I had access to two individuals who knew the slave trade quite intimately." He then gestured to the forms of the half-elves, Khloe and Luca, the former standing next to her queen with her hands clasped behind her back, and the latter was watching her master from afar, a strange little smile on her face that reminded the princesses of a cat about to pounce on its prey. Alicia licked her lips nervously and stammered, her voice dying in her throat before she turned on her heel and marched off without a word further, not even realizing that she had left her cousin with the forge master. They watched her retreating form in silence, knowing that seeing slavery happening within her home must have really rattled her. Naruto set aside his beverage and then offered his hand to Prim as he asked respectfully, "Would you like me to escort you to your room, Prim?" The Pinkette shook her head and replied, "Thank you for the offer, but I will be fine. Please excuse me." Prim then gave a swift curtsy and rushed off after her cousin, her heels clicking against the floor as she sped off. "HMPH, humans are such rude creatures. I would never show such disrespect." Luca spoke from behind her master, causing him to slowly shake his head negatively. "Don't be so quick to judge. Alicia is still processing the cold and hard truth, and Prim is simply worried about her cousin. They just need a little time." He spoke in an understanding tone. He kind of understood how Alicia felt. Reality can be a cruel thing. "Make sure Prim safely arrives at her quarters," he ordered, earning a nod from his retainer before she vanished from sight in a blur of motion. While Prim had declined his offer to escort her, that didn't mean he wasn't going to let her go unguarded. Better safe than sorry after all. Sensing a new but familiar presence behind him, he smirked as he spoke, "I think you enjoyed watching those nobles being taken to their doom." He turned around and, as he expected, was met by the form of Khloe, who had a little smile on her face as she nodded in satisfaction. "Was your former master amongst them?" Naruto asked out of curiosity. At his inquiry, the blonde half-elf shook her head no in disappointment. "No, he wasn't here. A shame. I was looking forward to paying him back for all the time he tormented me. No matter, we'll find him at some point." She spoke with confidence, clearly visible in her crimson eyes as she clenched a fist, imagining all of the wonderfully grotesque and horrific punishments and torture she could deliver upon her former master. Castration was currently at the top of the list that formed in her mind. "I'm surprised you're not by mother's side at the moment." The whiskered teen joked, since Khloe was almost always at her queen's side and he possessed very few memories of them ever being apart for longer than necessary. The blonde retainer pointed towards Olga's throne, which was currently being guarded by more of Naruto's demonic soldiers. The queen herself was surrounded by many nobles and aristocrats who were eagerly up to her, showering her with praises and gifts, complimenting her power, grace, beauty, and aura of authority while denouncing their now-deceased colleagues for owning slaves. Needless to say, the queen was enjoying the attention immensely, as the nobles were basically worshipping the very ground she walked on and the air she breathed. "I'd say she'll be fine for a while without me." Khloe spoke with a soft chuckle, then she blushed as she took on a more shy disposition and continued to speak. "Besides, I wanted to ask if you would dance with me." Naruto-sama. The Uzumaki quickly embraced his fellow blonde and whispered in her ear, "Ask and ye shall receive." "I'm all yours, Khloe." Her face flushed red beneath her mask as they joined the dance floor, a classical song playing as they began their dancing session while many nobles observed them. They're all watching us," Khloe muttered, remembering her time spent in a cage as humans leered at her. She could remember those beady, full eyes and those disgusting and ugly depraved smiles with clear vividness. "Don't focus on them. Focus on me. Remember, you are not the scared little girl you were then. You're now Queen Olga's loyal aide and a knight of the Garen Kingdom. You are much stronger now. However, if anyone so much as touches you, I'll flay them alive," the whiskered teen promised her with a grin, ready to protect her honor and maidenhood. She giggled at this and replied in both a nostalgic and joking manner, "Such a gentleman. I remember when you were a loud and obnoxious little thing with some moth-eaten rags for clothes. You were so skinny then too. What can I say, didn't have parents to teach me how to behave. Looking back on it, you were pretty cold to me for a while." Naruto fired back good-naturedly with a chuckle. His words earned an apologetic and guilty smile from the blonde half-elf as they continued their dance. Wasn't I for a while? I thought Olga-sama had lost her senses when she adopted you. It made me jealous seeing her being so attentive to you and your needs, teaching you manners, magic, calligraphy, and so much more. You never told me you were jealous of me. What changed your mind? The whiskered teen asked, since it was the first time he had heard of this, but then he supposed that he shouldn't be surprised. After all, Olga was the most important person in Khloe's life and the queen meant everything to her. When I saw how happy she was with you, whenever she was with you, her eyes lit up as I had never seen before and her smile was so warm and happy. For so long she has been seeking revenge against the humans who stole her homelands and ruined her people, our people, that she closed off her heart and turned it to ice so that none would hurt her again. Then you just appeared and everything changed. Without meaning to, you changed her and me," Khloe confessed as she tenderly caressed his cheek, her fingers running across his mask. "I'm not so sure if I changed you too. I think it'd be more accurate to say that I helped bring out the better parts of yourselves that you had locked away." The Forge Master spoke thoughtfully, prompting the former slave to smile all the brighter at him. "Maybe. Still, I am so happy to know you and can safely say that you're the only human, the only man that I truly love with all of my heart. You bring happiness to Olga-sama and to me. For what it's worth, I am sorry for being so mean to you when we first met." She apologized at the end, remembering that her grudge against humans had initially made her resentful against the poor boy. That is until she came to know him for what he was, a kind and pure soul that did not see others for their appearances or their race, but for their character and actions. They danced quietly together for a few moments, staring into each other's eyes. Khloe's crimson orbs turned a little misty as she gazed into Naruto's sapphire eyes until she gently lifted his mask up just enough to him on his lips. She then pulled back and replaced his mask, which prompted the Uzumaki to say, "You have nothing to be sorry for. I wasn't very pleasant then myself. We are the same in many ways, the both of us, carrying childhoods of pain, loneliness, and resentment. Together, you, me, Luca, Mother, will make a world where children or anyone for that matter are never made into slaves, whether their shackles be material or immaterial." "That sounds wonderful," Khloe replied as she rested her head against his shoulder, the two blondes falling into a comfortable silence as they enjoyed the tender moment between them. The music soon came to a halt, and their dance came to an end. She looked over his shoulder and a sly grin slowly formed on her face as the Uzumaki felt yet another familiar presence behind him. "One more dance for the evening," the voice of his mother spoke from behind him, prompting him to turn towards her. Khloe gave a bow of respect with one hand on her before making her way towards the sidelines, leaving the mother and son duo together. "I was wondering when you would ask." The Uzumaki spoke as he extended his hand to the queen, who accepted it, and the two danced together to the mellow music. "You made me wait a while," he humorously added, making his mother give an amused smile. "My apologies, my dear. The sycophants just wouldn't leave me alone long enough to slip away. Besides, you didn't seem to have a shortage of dance partners tonight," she quipped with a soft giggle, her son giving a smirk since he couldn't refute that. "Indeed, Luca almost desperately wants to be my lover." Khloe and I reminisced a bit. "I claimed Prim to discourage potential suitors and admirers from pestering her, and I think I may have a potential sparring partner in Alicia. Now here I am, dancing with my beautiful queen and mother, the woman who lifted me up and saved me from perdition." He spoke casually, earning a thoughtful hum from his mother. "Interesting," was all she said, her eyes listless and unreadable, but one could see the wheels turning in her mind but made no further comment. Whatever her son was up to, she was content to let things play out so long as they did not interfere with her plans for her future empire. "I'm curious, once we conquer Oz and have full control of the lands and its people, what will we do next?" the whiskered teen asked out of curiosity, his mother closing her eyes as she thought on his question. "I'm not certain. I've spent so much time seeking revenge against the church for what happened to my people, I never thought of what may come after. Were it not for you, both myself and Khloe would have been reduced to slaves and breeding sows. One thing I do know, with your skills, your mind, your charisma, and your limitless potential, the world could be your oyster. Once Oz is ours, I think I'll let you plan what comes next," Alga stated with a barely noticeable smirk. The Forge Master pursed his lips at the thought. So many possibilities to consider and potentially exploit. There was also a matter of some unfinished business being left unresolved. Sounds like fun, he replied with an almost sadistic grin being hidden beneath his mask. The mother and son duo continued their dance in a loving embrace, the both of them eager for tomorrow's events and what will come in the future. The next morning, Alicia yawned tiredly as she rubbed the sleepiness from her eyes. After last night's events, she had leapt straight into her bed upon entering her quarters. Unfortunately for the Princess Knight, she could not find sleep, nor would sleep claim her. She remembered tossing and turning and rolling around on the mattress. At some point she believed that she was teetering on the edge of sleep, but her mind was a chaotic whirlwind that prevented her from claiming a peaceful slumber. She glanced at her cousin who seemed to be lost in her own world, tracing her fingers around her lips in a rather odd fashion. Alicia paid no mind to this and instead turned her attention to the sight of a gigantic black cauldron being prepared in the fortress square. It was perhaps the largest cauldron she had ever seen, big enough for 3, maybe 4 men to sit in there rather comfortably. It was currently sitting on a large bed of logs and timber, filled to the brim with oil to the point of almost overflowing, and hanging several feet above the cauldron was her former Prime Minister. Beardsley was currently being hanged by his wrists via a length of chains that was connected to a crank that would lower him as it was turned. The old man was staring down at the body of oil beneath him, his eyes wide in terror as he knew what fate awaited him. For a while, he begged and pleaded for his life. Eventually people became fed up with his constant screaming and bleeding, so they requested that the old man be gagged to silence him. A request that the queen and her son happily granted. Speaking of the mother and son duo, the Princess Knight looked in the direction of the queen's private box and saw a large line of people forming in front of them both. More specifically, the line was made up of the former slaves that they had freed the night before, who were currently stained with the of their former masters that they had tortured long into the night until they were satisfied and ended the lives of their tormentors at long last. Now the queen was giving them a choice. The now freed slaves could choose to go their own way and seek their fortunes in the world as they like, or they can choose to bend the knee to her, pledge themselves to her and serve her of their own volition, where they will be taught various skills and paid and rewarded appropriately for their hard work. For many of them, it was an extremely easy choice. Almost all of them decided to swear fealty to their new queen. Alicia couldn't really blame them for this. The queen appeared to have a soft spot for slaves, and was promising them hot meals, warm beds, and fair pay. That was far more than their noted masters had ever given them. Honestly speaking, she should have been the one to free the slaves. This was her fortress, her responsibility, and she failed. She had been previously satisfied with allowing her prime minister the daily duties of running the fortress as she saw to the defenses and repelling the invading legion. A costly mistake which almost ruined her and caused corruption to fester in her own home. Her musing was broken when a soft hand took her own, prompting her to look and see her beloved cousin was softly smiling at her and spoke. "Please, Alicia, stop tormenting yourself over this. It was not your fault. But it is if I had been more dutiful, more attentive, maybe the blonde knight argued, but was cut off by the sounds of trumpets which immediately caught the attention of everyone present, nobility and commoners alike, who all turned towards the queen's private box. Today, we are here to execute a detestable waste of life. Your former prime minister, found guilty and sentenced for his crimes by your Princess Knight Alicia. Princess Alicia, as the one who passed the sentence, are you willing to execute it?" the queen asked at the end, her eyes seemingly piercing through the blonde knight. Alicia swallowed and stood tall, her fists clenching as she glared at the pathetic form of Beardsley, who was still letting out muffled pleas for mercy, tears and snot flowing like a waterfall down his face. What a pathetic human being. To think there was a time she considered him a dependable ally and confidant. How wrong she was. "I am," Alicia stated, eager to have this business over and done with and erase this piece of human filth from existence. Pretty soon, Beardsley would be nothing more than a bad memory, and eventually a forgotten one. In the background, Prim pursed her lips slightly, her eyes tearing up a bit. Being burned alive in oil was a cruel, painful, and awful way to die. Normally, Alicia would have sentenced a criminal to death by beheading, but this was different, because this time it was personal for her. While Prim hated violence and death, she still wanted to be here to support poor Alicia. Goddess knows how much she was hurting right now, how much pain she was now in. She doubted that killing Beardsley would heal Alicia's heart, but it might bring her some peace of mind. Naruto descended from the queen's box, his young retainer in tow, as they and Alicia approached the crank that would inevitably lower the squealing pig of a man into the oil. He held out his hand expectantly, prompting Luca to hand him a wineskin, which he then in turn presented to the Princess Knight herself. "Some liquid courage?" he asked while offering the alcoholic beverage. The blonde princess had to prevent herself from snatching it from his hands as she accepted it, and then began to eagerly gulp down the liquid contents. "You ever kill before?" Naruto asked with a blank expression, prompting Alicia to briefly nod as she continued guzzling down the wine greedily. "Ever kill another human before?" he asked further. This time the blonde knight took one last long gulp of wine before letting out a satisfied sigh and replied to him sadly, "No. Never a human before. Always monsters." At her admission, the Uzumaki slowly nodded and stated, "I see. Well, one thing I have to say about the monsters of the Legion. Prior to me destroying their minds, they never bothered hiding their nature, however loathsome and disgusting they were. Humans, though, different story. Humans always hide their true selves, hiding darkness and vileness that is more corrupt and twisted than even the most depraved of beasts. And Devil's Naruto paused for a brief moment as he summoned his signature Hanya mask in his hand, staring at it thoughtfully. Your Hanya mask, what does it mean to you? Alicia asked, wondering why he wore it both to battle and to the previous night. He seemed quite fond of the Hanya motif. We all wear masks, Alicia, sometimes to hide things or to protect things. In my case, this mask is a representation of my inner nature, of my grudge, something that I do not wish to hide, but to show to the world. Unlike most, I have nothing to hide, he responded proudly, his mask disappearing in a black wisp of smoke while his loyal retainer gave a knowing smirk behind him. What grudge against who? Alicia asked while tilting her head to the side. The whiskered teen stared at her for a few long moments, then snapped his fingers, setting the logs beneath the large cauldron on fire. Black smoke billowed out, rising up in the air, some of it being inhaled by Beardsley, making him cough and sputter, his body starting to sweat as he saw little bubbles already beginning to form in the oil below him. Whenever you're ready, Naruto stated as he returned towards the queen's box and sat at her side with his retainer staying beside him the whole time and filled a goblet of wine for him, which he took a long sip from as he and the Dark Elves all watched the Princess Knight expectantly. Alicia swallowed a thick lump in her throat, her face flushed from the alcohol and the burning heat from the blazing logs. She placed her hands on the crank and clenched her eyes shut as she had stated before. She had never killed another human before, but this was different. She had a duty to perform. She had to punish Beardsley for his crimes. She had to set an example. She had to show that there were consequences for one's crimes. This wasn't just about her or Beardsley's betrayal. There is no point to laws if they cannot or will not be enforced. This had to be done. She slowly turned towards the black cauldron, seeing the oil boiling as bubbles rapidly formed and popped along the oil's surface. She then grit her teeth and began slowly turning the crank. Little by little, inch by inch, her former minister slowly descended down towards what would be his doom. As he got closer and closer to the bubbling oil, Beardsley's cries became louder and more desperate and more shrill to the point that it sounded like a banshee was wailing and weeping. It seemed almost a miracle that his screams hadn't torn his vocal cords apart, or he hadn't accidentally swallowed and suffocated on the gag in his mouth. Beardsley lifted his legs up, as high as they would go, which wasn't very high given his age and lack of agility. Alicia glared at her former minister one last time, taking note that his toes were now but a few inches away from the boiling surface. She then hawked back a huge glob of saliva and spat at him with enough force that it successfully landed on the side of his face. She then began turning the crank more aggressively, which almost dropped the old man into the oil as he rapidly descended inside the cauldron. If Beardsley was screaming loudly before, he managed to reach a new level of volume as his screams of pain echoed across the square and throughout the fortress. Even the birds perched on the ramparts flew off in a panic upon hearing the noises of his curdling cries. Many people were forced to cover their ears in an attempt to preserve their hearing, collectively thinking that it didn't seem possible for an old man to scream so loudly. In the Queen's private box, the Dark Elves watched impassively, with the exclusion of Luca, who seemed to have a sadistic smile of satisfaction on her face at seeing a human being boiled alive, more specifically a human that wanted to a female. Khloe seemed to share in this sense of relief, though she schooled her features and retained an aloof facade, though if one looked close enough, one could see a ghost of a smile that made her lips twitch slightly. Naruto, for his part, was thinking about a certain howler monkey he encountered years ago in Konoha due to Beardsley's screeching. The similarity of that screaming almost perturbed him. Almost. He shoved those thoughts aside and watched the execution continue. It wasn't long before Beardsley's flesh began to redden and blister, his body writhing and contorting in pain as he thrashed around in the cauldron, trying to escape his own execution. However, his feet weren't touching the bottom, nor could he find any purchase to help him get out of the cauldron. All he really succeeded in doing was making some oil splash against the sides of the cauldron and on the ground. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, making a number of observers feel sick and cover their mouths. Even Prim covered her mouth in horror as she bore witness to her first execution. She had always been sheltered by her father and lived in a tiny little world of parties, and the occasional courting. Never before had she seen a man be put to death before, much less by means of boiling, yet here she was. She focused her eyes on her cousin, who was staring at the former minister with a cold and grim expression. Eventually, Beardsley's cries died in his throat and his struggles soon ceased as his insides were roasted and scalded by the boiling oil, until eventually all he could do was twitch uncontrollably, began pouring from his eyes, his nostrils, his ears and mouth until finally he stopped moving entirely. Once he had expired, Alicia turned the crank a few more times, allowing his body to sink into the boiling cauldron once and for all. It was done now. It was finally over. The man who had attempted to betray and enslave her was gone now. A mixture of feelings and emotions filled her. On the one hand, she was glad that the traitor was gone and had been appropriately punished for his crimes. She was free of him now. On the other hand, she had just taken the life of another human. A horrible one, but still a human, in what can only be described as a painful and cruel method of execution. She didn't know what she felt now at this moment. It didn't feel like guilt, no, definitely not guilt. It was a more complex feeling that she couldn't put a name to. Perhaps it was what was the word understanding was that for so long, she had been fighting the monsters of the Legion. Everything was cut into black and white then. Fight the monsters, protect the people. Simple. Now things were getting more complex and far more gray. Honestly, she didn't really know what to do with what could be called gray areas. She slowly turned towards her captor, noticing that he was staring at her, almost as if he could read her mind, or at least her face as easily as one would read a book. He then mouthed one word later, promising to speak with her at a later time. Honestly speaking, she would actually welcome it. She had a lot of things on her mind recently, though there was perhaps one thought more than any other that had plagued her mind throughout the long night. If slavery was happening within her own fortress, unseen and unchecked, where else could it be practiced? It could be happening everywhere in Eos then. Was the church truly complicit by turning a blind eye to these heathen practices? If so, what was she even fighting for then? She inhaled deeply and remembered that she didn't take up the sword for the church. It was for the sake of the people, for the sake of her cousin and her friends, that she became a knight. Her duty had never changed. Her duty was to fight evil, no matter the guise it took. If slavery was still alive in Eos, then duty and honor demanded that she fight and root out this evil wherever it may be. Human, non-human, all life was sacred and worth protecting. To shackle others for coin was sacrilege and evil. Perhaps she should consider forming a new alliance with the Dark Queen and her son. She glanced back towards Prim and saw that her cousin seemed to be deep in thought as well as their gazes met. Even without words, they could tell what the other was thinking. They had not been stripped of their titles after being held captive. They had not been treated as trophies or toys by their captors. Their captors behaved with honor, integrity, and kindness. They had been treated with respect and care. They both nodded at each other in agreement. If the church was truly corrupt and allowing slavery in Eos, then that was something they wouldn't and couldn't tolerate. The two princesses then stared up at the sky, hoping that their friends could see the truth as well. However, they also were deeply concerned for their friend Celestine, the current icon and goddess of the church. What would happen to her if she found out the truth? Would the church turn on her, take her as a hostage? That was a very disturbing thought. Celestine was a pure and good person. She never saw herself as above others because of her high elf or goddess status, and she always fostered and cared for lost, abandoned, or orphaned children. If she knew the truth, there was no doubt she would be appalled and would see the cruel practices of slavery ended. For now, though, it was time to talk of the prospect of an alliance. Later, just as Naruto promised. Yes, later. Meanwhile, White Citadel. Celestine sat in her meditation chambers, sitting in a lotus position on a large, plush and comfy cushion. Her face was calm and serene as she slowly opened her eyes. Something has changed, she muttered quietly. She wasn't sure what, but she was certain that the threads of fate had been plucked somehow or other. Even without her visions, she still possessed strong magic and could still sense things. Something was happening in the first fortress. She wasn't sure what, but something of great significance had happened, though she wasn't sure what. Whatever it was, she was certain that either the Dark Queen or her mysterious Forge Master was a part of it. She closed her eyes to resume her meditation, trying to get a feel of what may be occurring in Eos. She sensed a sweeping darkness, a corruption throughout the realm. There was great evil afoot, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere, from all around, though she could not pinpoint the origin. Still, this was perturbing. The strength of evil was growing, there was no doubt of this, and worse, the people would undoubtedly suffer for it. She heard the doors of her meditation chambers opening, breaking her from her musings as she opened her eyes and turned to see Claudia's husband enter inside, his arms filled with a large number of books and tomes that he seemed to be struggling a little with. Celestine-sama, apologies for interrupting, but I believe this may be urgent, he called out as he rushed towards the goddess herself, which caused him to stumble and fall to the floor, causing his books to hit the marble with a loud thud and slide across the room. Celestine rose to her feet and helped collect the fallen books as she asked him, "What is it, Klaus? What's wrong?" The scholar got up from the floor and adjusted his glasses and then used his forearm to wipe some of the sweat off his head as he breathed heavily. Evidently he had been running for some time now. After catching his breath, Klaus began to speak. "I have been helping Claudia with her investigation and noticed some strange things. We first did an inventory of the church armory to see if any equipment had been stolen by the imposters posing as church soldiers. All armor, gear, and weapons were accounted for, and no reports of stolen items had ever been made." At this news, the goddess let out a soft gasp as she muttered, "If nothing is stolen, then that strongly implies that church soldiers are indeed extorting and robbing people." Klaus nodded his head and then produced another book, one that was used to keep a record of the church finances. Why would he have that after finding out that church soldiers may be stealing coin? I began checking through church finances to see how far this corruption went and see what else had been potentially stolen. I then found evidence of certain discrepancies. Records of tithes and large sums of coin being given to the church, all by unnamed donors. What's even stranger is that these donations are all being handled by a select group of bishops, and these donations have been going on for years. Klaus explained, pointing to a series of names that repeatedly appeared in the ledger. Bribery, maybe, but for what? Celestine muttered thoughtfully, recognizing the names of the bishops. All of them being quite influential and have been in power within the church for many, many years. Something wasn't right. I'm not sure. I need to dig deeper, Klaus muttered as he adjusted his glasses, rapidly flipping through the pages. Celestine pursed her lips, knowing that greed was almost always the root cause of corruption, and where corruption festered, bad things always followed. If the upper echelons of the church were indeed corrupt and also allowing their soldiers to rob the people, then wait. This can't be a coincidence, Celestine muttered, her running cold upon coming to a sudden realization. Her bishops, her advisors, had pushed for her to send Vult and his Kuroinu to capture the Dark Queen upon learning that Olga would lose her powers. Now she has lost her own powers of clairvoyance as well. This proves that these events are connected. It had the church planned for this plan for Olga's downfall followed by her own. Why, what would they have to gain from betraying her, their own goddess? Well, what did you say? Celestine Sama, Klaus asked, not hearing the high elf who was currently biting her lip. Continue our investigations. We need to look deeper into this. I do not wish to jump to false conclusions or arrest the wrong people, but be wary, Clausen. Tell no one and be wary of who you trust. I fear that the Legion are now the least of our concerns, she ordered, causing the scholar to bow deeply and nod in understanding before departing as he collected the remaining books and ran off with all haste. However, he forgot the book that had the records and inventory of the church armory. He burst through the doors and a pair of loud yelps came from behind them, one Celestine recognized as Klaus' voice, the other sounding feminine. She heard Klaus shout some sort of apology before continuing on, and then a new figure entered the goddess chambers. The Bishop Eleonora Byrne, or Bishop L for short. Bishop L, what a surprise. How long were you there? Celestine asked in suspicion. What a strange coincidence that a bishop so happened to be just outside while Klaus was giving his report. Not long, I had just arrived. Poor Klaus almost tripped over me, gave me quite a fright. Eleonora replied with a soft giggle while brushing aside a lock of hair. The female bishop then glanced down at the tome the goddess was currently holding and asked, what's that? The high elf glanced at the armory's ledger and decided to test and see what the bishop had heard. She didn't like lying or deceiving others, but right now, the people she could trust seemed to be growing exponentially shorter by the day, if not by the hour. A ledger for the church armory. It would seem that several sets of armor and weapons were stolen. Celestine lied, her words making the bishop's eyes flash with anger. So it is true, just as I suspected. It is truly reprehensible for bandits to impersonate church soldiers and steal coin from the people. I hope these criminals are found and lashed for this. The female bishop spoke venomously. An interesting reaction. There was no surprise or deception in her voice. She truly believed that this was the work of bandits and thieves, not legitimate church soldiers. Bishop L, if I may ask, what does the church mean to you? Celestine questioned, earning a raised eyebrow from the clergywoman. Pardon, what a strange question. The clergywoman muttered and could only stare in confusion at the high elf. There was a long and tense silence. Sensing the dissatisfaction of the goddess, Eleonora then spoke. I have always believed the church to be a symbol of peace and equality. Our duty is to protect and care for others, especially the less fortunate, and to defeat the Legion, lest they pillage, burn, and violate their way across the O's. But what if the Legion isn't the real problem? What if evil already exists within our very own borders and our homes amongst us? Celestine asked, though it seemed she was directing the questions to herself as she closed her eyes in deep contemplation. Celestine Sama, what are you saying? You're scaring me. The clergywoman muttered, never having seen the elven goddess act or speak in this manner. It was almost like some kind of ill omen. Imagine how I must feel now, Celestine muttered, feeling blind and lost. For so long, thanks to her clairvoyance, she could always peer into the future, see disasters coming and plan ahead for them, or share good tidings with the people to lift their spirits. Now everything seemed so uncertain. Never mind. What did you need of me? Celestine asked, wondering why the female bishop had sought her out. Eleonora gave a quick bow and then replied, yes. We have received word that the Legion armies are beginning to form up and will soon be on the march to the second fortress. The people are getting scared and wish to know what to expect. At this, Celestine felt her heart sink. The people were expecting her to have a vision of hope or victory, something, anything, so that they at least know what was going on. The high elf slowly nodded and followed the clergywoman out of her chambers. After making their way through a series of halls and rounding a few corners, Celestine found herself standing on a terrace overlooking the large square in front of her cathedral. She saw hundreds, maybe thousands of people in the square, looking up at her expectantly, waiting anxiously for her to speak. The female bishop handed a scroll to the high elf, who accepted it with brief hesitation. She unfurled it and began reading its contents. She then cleared her throat and began to speak down towards the people. My friends, my neighbors, my people, I have just received word that the Legion army will soon be on the march towards the second fortress. Before her capture, the Princess Prim hired the Hakuro mercenaries, headed by Leona, to reinforce her fortress. Currently, a force of 1,000 church soldiers are on a forced march to further reinforce them. Graves Levantine is on his way now with his own forces to beat back the Legion army and halt their advance. Her words earned a wave of relieved sighs from many of the civilians, who accepted this news with gladdened smiles. Then from somewhere in the crowd shouted up at her, asking Celestine Sama, what news about the Dark Queen? What have your visions revealed to you all at once? Many people began shouting these same questions. Ah, that is what she feared. The people wanted to know if she had any visions. Right now, she had three options before her. First, she could lie and tell the people what she believed that they wanted to hear to appease them, at the risk of losing their trust. Second, she could say that she hadn't yet had any visions, which would not be a lie per se, but it would leave the people dissatisfied and wouldn't stop them from asking again later. Third, she could tell them the whole truth and place her faith and trust in them. Everyone, I have a confession to make. She spoke, tears brimming in her eyes, but despite her fears, she remained resolute as the people looked up at her, wondering what she was about to say. I was told not to reveal this to you, for fear that you may panic or lose hope. However, I cannot and will not bring myself to betray the trust and faith you have in me. The truth is, I have recently lost my powers of foresight by unknown means. At her confession, a series of shocked gasps echoed throughout the square as people stared up at the high elf with wide eyes. Even Bishop Eleonora couldn't suppress an audible gasp as she covered her mouth in shock. Of all the things that the goddess could have said, that was something they never could have or would have expected to hear in their entire lives. Yes, you all heard me correctly. I cannot peer into the future. I know you are scared, I know you are afraid, but I also know that all of you are stronger than this. I know that together, we can overcome these trials we face. Please, I beg of you, do not give in to your fears or despair. Have faith in each other, protect each other, be good to each other. Together, you can be stronger than any army and have the power to dispel the darkness of evil. Together, the love, faith, and trust you all share can be a wall that no army can smash down. Please save each other. You must protect each other for whatever it is worth. I am sorry that I failed you. However, with or without my powers of clairvoyance, I will fight for you all into my dying breath and dispel the evils that plague us no matter what form they may take. The goddess shouted down to her people, pouring her very heart and soul into her words as tears freely flowed down her cheeks. Once she was done speaking, her heaved as she tried to catch her breath. Her heart thundered in her as she awaited the people's reactions. There was silence for a few long moments, then suddenly, someone in the crowd began to cheer. Then this was followed by more cheers, and more until everyone began cheering at the top of their lungs for their goddess until their cries echoed throughout the White Citadel. Celestine Sama, Celestine Sama, the people chanted loudly, showing their support for the benevolent high elf. Young, old, rich, poor, all of the people cheered her name, moved to tears by her unwavering compassion and loyalty and by her trust in them. All they could do in turn was repay that trust and loyalty in kind and show her their support. Claudius, and you gave the people too little credit. Hope is still alive so long as we keep fighting for all that is good in the world. The people won't lose themselves to the darkness. Celestine spoke to herself, then out of the corner of her eye, on the edges of the crowd, she saw a small group of bishops conversing with each other and glaring at her. It would seem her words had somehow angered others. This clenched it for her. It would seem that the invading legion was perhaps not the most dire threat they faced. One thing she had forgotten during her time amongst humans, living as their goddess and living a life of comfort and ease, was that countless humans wore masks, each concealing their own sins and their own demons. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.